Hi, Namaskaram. Good evening, everyone. So, actually, എൻ്റെ റോൾ ഇവിടെ ടെക്നിക്കൽ കണക്ടിവിറ്റി ചെയ്യുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ് എൻ്റെ ജോലി. എന്നാലും ഞാൻ ജസ്റ്റ് ഒന്ന് സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാം. TPS സാറിൻ്റെ ഈ പുതിയ സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാം. TPS സാറിൻ്റെ ഈ പുതിയ ക്ലബ്ബ്. ഇപ്പം TPS സാറിനെ കുറിച്ച് പറയുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഇപ്പം ടെലിവിഷൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ മാധ്യമം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കേബിൾ TV വന്ന സമയത്ത് സാറ് അതിനകത്ത് എൻ്റർടൈൻമെൻറ്റും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സീരിയലുകളും മാത്രമായിരുന്നപ്പോൾ സാർ അതിനകത്ത് ഒരു എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഫോറിൻ പോളിസിയെ കുറിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളൊരു പ്രോഗ്രാം കൊണ്ടുവന്നു. അത് ഏകദേശം 10 വർഷത്തോളം നീണ്ടു നിന്നൊരു പ്രോഗ്രാമായിരുന്നു. അത് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് സാറ് യൂട്യൂബിലും ഫേസ്ബുക്കിലും ഏത് സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയ എടുത്താലും സാറുണ്ടാവും. അതിലെല്ലാം സാറിൻ്റെ ഇത്രയും നാളത്തെ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസും സാറ് സഞ്ചരിച്ച രാജ്യങ്ങളുടെ പ്രത്യേകതകളും ഫോറിൻ പോളിസിയിലുള്ള ചേഞ്ചസും ഇപ്പം എനിക്കറിയാം, എവിടെയെങ്കിലും ഒരു സ്ഥലത്തൊരു രാജ്യത്തൊരു വെടി പൊട്ടി എന്നറിഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ എല്ലാ ചാനലുകളും ഓടിയെത്തുന്നത് ഇന്ന് സാറിൻ്റെ വീടിൻ്റെ ഫ്രണ്ടിലാണ്. അപ്പം എനിക്ക് സാർ ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു ഇനിഷ്യേറ്റീവ് എടുത്തതിന്, അതും ക്ലബ് ഹൗസ് പോലുള്ള ഈ ഒരു പുതിയ നവമാധ്യമത്തിൽ സാറിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഇനിഷ്യേറ്റീവ്, അത് ഒരുപാട് ആൾക്കാർക്ക് പ്രയോജനപ്പെടും. അപ്പം സാറിൻ്റെ ഈ ഇതിൽ രാജീവ് സാറും ഉണ്ട് ഇന്ന് അതിഥിയായിട്ട്. അപ്പം രാജീവ് സാറിനെ വെൽക്കം ചെയ്യുന്നു. സാറ് റൈസ് ഓഫ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുകയാണ്. സാറും രാജീവ് സാറും സംസാരിച്ച് കഴിയുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും ഞാൻ ഹാൻഡ് റൈസ് ഓൺ ചെയ്യും. ആ വിഷയത്തിനെ കുറിച്ച് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് സംസാരിക്കേണ്ട കാര്യത്തിൽ ഹാൻഡ് റൈസ് ചെയ്താൽ ഞാൻ ഓഡിയൻസിലേക്ക് കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നതായിരിക്കും. ഓവർ ടു TP sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sajeev. Actually, you are responsible for this. This is your idea, not mine. Full credit for that. Or if there is any blame, that too is yours. Anyway, so I won't say anything before Rajeev Srinivasan launches this program, because that is his privilege to tell us what he expects from us. We can use both languages if people want to lingual. Of course, I'm more comfortable with English when I talk about foreign affairs and globetrotting and so on, but that doesn't constrain me. എനിക്ക് മലയാളത്തിലും സംസാരിക്കാനും കുറച്ചൊക്കെ അറിയാം. അതുകൊണ്ട് അതൊരു പ്രശ്നമായിരിക്കില്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് I want everybody to feel comfortable whatever language that they can speak. വിചാരിക്കാൻ ടെസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യേണ്ടി വരില്ല എന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. Anyway, many of you may know Rajeev Srinivasan because he is a columnist and a writer also, in addition to all his other talents. He is basically a professor at IMM, Bangalore, and in between he does many other things. He started off his technology experience in the US for many years, and he is one of those rare people who came back from the United States in spite of his great expertise on technology. And so that has been a blessing for us, and also he is a management guru in a way for us, and also he is a management guru in a way, and he headed the management school here, Asian School of Management, and he has been a partner with me in the Videsha Vicharam program. So whenever I had something very exciting to discuss, I always called Rajeev, and he is very exciting to discuss, I always called Rajeev. And he is also very bilingual. He can use both the languages. So when I thought of this, I could not think of anybody else to launch it, to give us a kind of framework. Both from, he knows me, so he knows what I know. And he knows me, so he knows what I know. And he knows the audience. And therefore, he may be able to give us a framework for this. And after that, I'll come back to you. Rajeev, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a distinct pleasure for me to be able to give a few introductory remarks. കാരണം സജീവ് പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ സരസമായിട്ട് ഫോറിൻ അഫയേഴ്സിനെ പറ്റി സംസാരിക്കാനും അതിനെപ്പറ്റി അതിന്റെ ഉള്ളുകളിലൊക്കെ പുറത്ത് കൊണ്ടുവരാനും അംബാസിഡറെ പോലെ കഴിവുള്ള ഒരാളിനെ കേരളത്തിൽ ഉണ്ടെന്ന്, അത് ഇന്ത്യയിൽ തന്നെ ഉണ്ടോ എന്ന് സംശയമാണ്. കാരണം ഞാൻ ഇതിനെപ്പറ്റി തന്നെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിനോട് പറയുകയായിരുന്നു. ക്ലബ് ഹൗസിന്റെ ഏർലിയർ ഒരു എപ്പിസോഡ് ഞാൻ കേട്ടിട്ട് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു, അംബാസിഡർ, യു ആർ എ മാസ്റ്റർ ഓഫ് ദിസ് മീഡിയം. TV മാത്രമല്ല, എഴുത്ത് മാത്രമല്ല, ഈ ക്ലബ് ഹൗസിൽ പോലും വന്നപ്പോൾ എന്ത് സരസമായിട്ട് എത്രയോ മണിക്കൂർ അദ്ദേഹം സംസാരിച്ചു. ഹൈ സബ്ജക്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് തോന്നുന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അംബാസിഡറുടെ ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാം കേട്ട് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അത് ഒട്ടും ഡ്രൈ അല്ല, അങ്ങേയറ്റം ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സബ്ജക്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഒരു എഡ്യൂക്കേഷനും കിട്ടും. അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം ടൈം യുൽ ബി എന്റർടൈൻ. കാരണം ഒരുപാട് പേഴ്സണൽ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസസും അനക്ഡോട്ട്സും എല്ലാം അംബാസിഡറിന് പറയാനുണ്ട്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ ാണ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ പ്രചോദനം ആയിരുന്ന ഒരു അംബാസിഡർ, പുള്ളിയുടെ പേര് ഞാൻ മറന്നുപോയി, അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ സ്വന്തം ഹോം വില്ലേജ് ഇന്ന്, വിച്ച് ഇസ് ഓൾസോ ഹാപ്പൻസ് ടു ബി മൈൻ ആസ് വെൽ, മാവേലിക്കരയ്ക്ക് അടുത്തുള്ള കെ ശങ്കരപിള്ള അല്ലേ, സാക്ഷി, ഒരു ഇന്ത്യൻ ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ്, രക്തസാക്ഷിയായ കാര്യം അദ്ദേഹം പറഞ്ഞു. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെ ഒരുപാട് ചെറിയ ചെറിയ പേഴ്സണൽ ഇൻസിഡൻസും അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് പറയാനുണ്ട്. കാരണം അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ഒരു ഹീറോ ആയിരുന്നു മിസ്റ്റർ ശങ്കരപിള്ള. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ആ ഒരു ഫുഡ് സ്റ്റെപ്സിൽ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യാനാണ് അംബാസിഡർ IFS പോയത് എന്നും പറഞ്ഞു. അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഫോറിൻ അഫയേഴ്സ് വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആവുന്നുള്ള. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ വൈ, എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ എന്റെ ബാക്ക്ഗ്രൗണ്ട് പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെ ടെക്നോളജിയും മാനേജ്മെന്റും ആണ്. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഒരാള് എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ഈ ഫോറിൻ അഫയേഴ്സിൽ താല്പര്യം കാണിക്കുന്നു എന്ന് ചോദിച്ചാൽ, എന്റെ വിനീതമായ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ ഈ ഫോറിൻ അഫയേഴ്സ് ഒരുപാട് രാജ്യങ്ങൾ അവരുടെ സ്വന്തം നാഷണൽ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റ്, താല്പര്യങ്ങൾ മുൻപോട്ട് കൊണ്ടുപോകാനായിട്ട് വളരെ കോംപ്ലിക്കേറ്റഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ചെസ് ഗെയിം കളിക്കുന്നതാണ് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു നിരീക്ഷകന് അങ്ങേയറ്റം ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു കാര്യമാണ്. കാരണം രണ്ട് തരത്തിൽ നോക്കാം, വളരെ ഉപരിപ്ലവമായിട്ട്, വളരെ സൂപ്പർഫിഷ്യൽ ആയിട്ട് വേണമെങ്കിൽ സ്ട്രാറ്റജിയും ഇതിനകത്ത് കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ്ലി ഇനഫ്, ഈ ബിസിനസ് സ്ട്രാറ്റജി, വിച്ച് ഇസ് സ്പെസിഫിക്കലി മൈ ഏരിയ, അതിന്റെ ഉത്ഭവം ഈ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ ഇന്റർനാഷണൽ സ്ട്രാറ്റജിയിൽ നിന്നാണ്. ദർ വാസ് എ പ്രൊഫസർ നെയിം പോർട്ടർ, ഹാർവർഡ് യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിലെ പോർട്ടർ ആണ് അത് കൊണ്ടുവന്നത്. അദ്ദേഹം സ്ട്രാറ്റജി ആൻഡ് നാഷണൽ സ്ട്രാറ്റജിയിൽ നിന്ന് ഉത്ഭവിച്ചതാണ്. പക്ഷേ ഇപ്പൊ വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ട് അത് തിരിച്ചു വരുന്നുണ്ട്. നിങ്ങൾ പലരും CK പ്രഹ്ലാദ് എന്നൊരു മാനേജ്മെന്റ് തിങ്കറെ പറ്റി കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. ഹി വാസ് ഇൻ ദി US, വളരെ ഏറ്റവും ഉയർന്ന തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു തിങ്കർ ആയിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ പല ഐഡിയാസ് ഇപ്പൊ തിരിച്ചു വരുന്നുണ്ട്, ബിസിനസ് ഐഡിയാസ് സ്ട്രാറ്റജിയിലേക്കും വരുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ ചുരുക്കം പറഞ്ഞാൽ, എന്റെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ ലോകത്തിലെ ഏറ്റവും എക്സൈറ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ചതുരംഗ കളി, ഗെയിം ഓഫ് ചെസ് ആണ് ഇത്. കാരണം നമ്മുടെ ഭാവിയും നമ്മളുടെ പുരോഗമനവും എങ്ങനെയാണ് ലോകം മുൻപോട്ട് പോകുന്നത് അതിനുള്ള താല്പര്യം. വെരി വെരി ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് തിങ്സ് ഗോയിങ് ഓൺ. ഇന്ന് ഞാനൊരു കാര്യം വായിച്ചു, അതായത് ട്വിറ്ററും ഇന്ത്യൻ ഗവൺമെന്റുമായിട്ടൊരു വടംവലി നടക്കുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ. ഇന്ന് ഒരു വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു അലിഗേഷൻ കണ്ടു. കാരണം അതും പറയാൻ കാരണമുണ്ട്, പലപ്പോഴും ചില കൺസ്പിറസി തിയറീസ് ഒക്കെ പൊങ്ങി വരും. അത് ഉള്ളതാണോ കള്ളമാണോ നമുക്കറിയില്ല. പക്ഷെ ഇപ്പൊ ഈ തിയറിയിൽ പറയുന്നത്, ശിവ അയ്യാദുറൈ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ഒരാളുണ്ട്, MIT-യില് ഒരു PhD എടുത്ത ആളാണ്, പ്രൊഫസറും കൂടെ ആണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹമാണ് ഇമെയിൽ ഇൻവെന്റ് ചെയ്ത ആള്. പുള്ളി പറയുന്നത് ട്വിറ്റർ അമേരിക്കൻ ഗവൺമെന്റിന്റെ ഒരു ഹിഡൻ ആം ആണെന്നാണ്. I don't know if it's true or not, പക്ഷെ that's a very interesting idea. അതുപോലെ ഒരുപാട് കാര്യങ്ങളിൽ പിന്നെ മുൻപോട്ട് പോകുന്ന ഫോർസൈറ്റ് ഉള്ള രാജ്യങ്ങള് മാത്രമല്ല, വേറൊരു CK പ്രഹ്ലാദിന്റെ ഒരു ടേം ഉണ്ട് which I would like to present to you. It's called strategic intent. അതായത് ഭാവിയെ പറ്റിയുള്ള നമ്മളുടെ ലക്ഷ്യബോധം എന്താണുള്ളത്, ആ ലക്ഷ്യബോധമുള്ള രാജ്യങ്ങളും കമ്പനികളുമാണ് മുൻപോട്ട് പോകുന്നത്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ നമ്മൾ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട് സെക്കൻഡ് വേൾഡ് വാറിൽ തറ പറ്റിയിരുന്ന ജപ്പാനും ജർമ്മനിയും ഒരു 20 കൊല്ലം കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് മുൻനിരയിലെത്തി. അതുപോലെ ഒന്നുമില്ലാതിരുന്ന ചൈന ഏകദേശം 1990 വരെ they were nothing. ആ കഴിഞ്ഞ ഒരു 30 കൊല്ലത്തിനുള്ളിൽ മുൻനിരയിലെത്തി. ഇതൊക്കെ എങ്ങനെയാണ്, എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് അവര് അങ്ങനെ പൊങ്ങി വന്നത്? ഇത് യാദൃശ്ചികമല്ല, അവരത് പ്ലാൻ ചെയ്തതിന് ശേഷമാണ്. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെ വരുമ്പോൾ നമ്മളെ പോലുള്ള ഒരു രാജ്യം ഇന്ത്യ എങ്ങനെയാണ് തങ്ങളുടെ ചെസ് നീക്കങ്ങൾ മുമ്പോട്ട് കൊണ്ടുപോകേണ്ടത്, മറ്റുള്ളവർക്ക് എന്തായിരിക്കും എന്നൊരു 2-3 ലെവൽ മുൻപോട്ട് പോയി നമ്മൾ മുൻകൂട്ടി കാണുകയും അതിനുള്ള മറുമരുന്ന് നമ്മൾ സംഘടിപ്പിക്കുകയും വേണം. അതേസമയം ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ ഇത്രയും ഗഹനമായിട്ട് സ്ട്രാറ്റജിയെ പറ്റി പഠിച്ചില്ല എന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ പോലും ഒരു ടൂറിസ്റ്റിന്റെ നിലയിലോ ഒരു സ്റ്റുഡന്റിന്റെ നിലയിലോ ആണെങ്കിൽ പോലും നമ്മളായിരിക്കും ഭാവിയിൽ സമ്പന്നമാകുന്നത്. നമുക്ക് എവിടെ പോയാലാണ് അതുകൊണ്ട് നമുക്ക് പ്രയോജനം ഉണ്ട്. ഇപ്പൊ നമുക്ക് കുറെ നാളായിട്ട് അമേരിക്കയിൽ പോകുന്നതാണ് ഒരു വലിയൊരു എല്ലാവരുടെയും ഒരു ലക്ഷ്യം. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ ഞാൻ 10-20 കൊല്ലം അവിടെ താമസിച്ചിരുന്ന ആളാണ്. പക്ഷെ ഇപ്പൊ ഒരു സംശയമുണ്ട്, പിന്നെ വേറെ വല്ല രാജ്യങ്ങളിലാണ് പോകേണ്ടത്. ചൈനീസ് പഠിക്കണോ? ആലോചിക്കുന്നുണ്ടാവും, പിള്ളേരെ ചൈനീസ് പഠിപ്പിക്കണോ? കാരണം അവർക്ക് ഭാവിയിൽ നിന്ന് പിഴച്ചു പോകണ്ടേ. അതുപോലെ പിന്നെ വേറൊന്നുള്ളത്, അമേരിക്ക സയൻസ് ആൻഡ് ടെക്നോളജിയിൽ മാത്രമല്ല കൾച്ചറിലും ഡോമിനന്റ് ആയിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ ഇപ്പൊ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നുണ്ട് നമ്മുടെ ഓഡിയൻസിൽ പലരും കൊറിയൻ K-പോപ്പിന്റെ ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു രാജ്യമായ കൊറിയ എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഇത്ര വലിയൊരു കൾച്ചറൽ പവർ ആയത്. അപ്പൊ അതിൽ നിന്ന് വേറൊരു ചോദ്യം, ഇന്ത്യക്കും തങ്ങളുടെ കൾച്ചറൽ പവർ, സോഫ്റ്റ് പവർ എങ്ങനെ മുമ്പോട്ട് കൊണ്ടുവരാം എന്നുള്ളത്. സോ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ഓൾസോ എൻ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് കോൺസെപ്റ്റ് ഹിയർ. ഹാർഡ് പവർ ഒരു വശത്തുണ്ട്, മറുവശത്ത് സോഫ്റ്റ് പവർ ഉണ്ട്. നമ്മൾ കണ്ടല്ലോ, പിന്നെ കൺഫ്യൂഷ്യസ് ഒരുപാട് പിന്നെ സ്ഥാപനങ്ങളൊക്കെ കൊണ്ടുവന്നു ടു പുഷ് ഫോർവേഡ് ദർ സോഫ്റ്റ് പവർ ആൻഡ് ചൈനീസ് ലാംഗ്വേജ് ആൻഡ് സോ ഫോർത്ത്. അതും നമ്മളുടെ വേറൊരു തരത്തിലുള്ള ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റ് ആണ്. ആൻഡ് ആസ് ഐ സെഡ്, ടൂറിസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് പോകണം. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ, ഞാൻ ഏഷ്യയിൽ ഒരുപാട് സ്ഥലത്ത് പോയിട്ടുണ്ട്, യൂറോപ്പിലും കുറെ ഭാഗത്ത് പോയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇറ്റ്സ് എക്സ്ട്രീംലി ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് അവിടെ പോയിട്ട് അംബാസിഡർ ഇതിനകത്ത് പോയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇറ്റ്സ് എക്സ്ട്രീംലി ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് അവിടെ പോയിട്ട് അംബാസിഡർ ഇത് തുടങ്ങുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞു. വിയന്നയില് ഒരു കൊറോണ ഗോഡസിന് ഒരു ഷ്രൈൻ ഉണ്ട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നു. അതായത് ബ്ലാക്ക് പ്ലേഗ്, ഏതാണ്ട് 500-600 കൊല്ലം മുമ്പ് നടന്ന ബ്ലാക്ക് പ്ലേഗിന്റെ ഒരു അനുസ്മരണമായിട്ട് ഒരു ഷ്രൈൻ അവിടെ, ഗോഡസ് കൊറോണ. അമേസിങ്. അന്നത്തെ കാലത്ത് പോലെ ഇങ്ങനത്തെ ഒരു കൊറോണ ദേവിയെ പറ്റി ആൾക്കാർ ആലോചിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളൂ. സോ ദർ ആർ വെരി വെരി ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് തിങ്സ് ഈവൻ അറ്റ് ദ ലെവൽ ഓഫ് എ ടൂറിസ്റ്റ്. പിന്നെ വേറൊരു കാര്യം, അംബാസിഡറുടെ ഈ പ്രഭാഷണങ്ങളിൽ ഉണ്ടാവുമെന്ന് ഞാൻ പ്രതീക്ഷിക്കുന്നത്, അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് വലിയ രാജ്യങ്ങൾ, അതായത് ജപ്പാൻ, അമേരിക്ക മുതലായ രാജ്യങ്ങളെ പറ്റി ധാരാളം പിന്നെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന് പറയാനുണ്ട്. ജപ്പാനിൽ വളർന്ന ആളിൽ അദ്ദേഹം അംബാസിഡർ ആയിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ അമേരിക്കയിലും മോസ്കോയിലുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ മറ്റു ചെറിയ രാജ്യങ്ങളിൽ പോയി. പിന്നെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ഇന്റർനാഷണൽ അറ്റോമിക് എനർജി ഏജൻസി ആയിട്ടുള്ള ബന്ധങ്ങളും നമ്മൾക്ക് വളരെ അതെവിടെയാണ്? IAEA വിയന്നയിലാണോ? വിയന്ന. അപ്പൊ അതുമൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് വളരെ രസകരമായിട്ട് വരും. എനിക്കും അംബാസിഡർക്കും രണ്ടുപേർക്കും താല്പര്യമുള്ള ഒരു രാജ്യമാണ് ജപ്പാൻ. വളരെ വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ, എന്റെ അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ ഇന്ത്യ ജപ്പാനെ പിന്തുടരേണ്ടതാണ്. കാരണം അവര് വളരെ മോഡേണൈസ് ചെയ്ത് വളരെ പ്രോസ്പെറസ് ആയി, എന്നാലും അവരുടെ സോ ഇറ്റ്സ് എ വെരി ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ഡൈക്കോട്ടമി ദേ. അതുപോലെ പിന്നെ മാത്രമല്ല, ചെറിയ രാജ്യങ്ങൾ ഭൂട്ടാൻ, ഫിജി, കീനിയ, അവിടെ ഇവിടെയൊക്കെ അംബാസിഡറിന്റെ പേഴ്സണൽ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഇതൊക്കെ പോട്ടെ, അദ്ദേഹത്തിനെ പറ്റി ഏറ്റവും വളരെ രസകരമായിട്ടുള്ളൊരു കാര്യം, ഹീസ് എ റക്കോണ്ടർ. അതായത് കഥ പറഞ്ഞു തന്നാൽ നമ്മൾ വായും തുറന്നിരുന്ന് കഥ കേൾക്കുമായിരുന്നല്ലോ, അപ്പൂപ്പന്മാര് മഹാഭാരതം രാമായണം ഒക്കെ പറഞ്ഞു തരുന്ന പോലെ. അതുപോലെ അംബാസിഡറിന് മുമ്പ് പോയിരുന്നാൽ കഥകൾ ഇങ്ങനെ വന്നുകൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കും. അനർഗളമായ ഒരു ഫ്ലോ ആണ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഇറ്റ്സ് റിയലി എൻ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ ടു ലിസൺ ടു ഹിം. ആൻഡ് അതുകൊണ്ട് വെദർ യു ആർ എ സ്റ്റുഡന്റ്, എ ടൂറിസ്റ്റ്, ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ്, ഐ തിങ്ക് ഓൾ ഓഫ് യു വിൽ ബെനിഫിറ്റ്. ഈ രണ്ട് തരത്തിലും, ദ ബിഗ് പിക്ചർ, ഈ രാജ്യങ്ങൾ എന്താണ് അങ്ങോട്ടും ഇങ്ങോട്ടും ചെയ്യാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്, അതുപോലെ ദ സ്മോൾ പിക്ചർ, ദ മൈക്രോ, നമ്മളുടെ പേഴ്സണൽ അനിക്ഡോട്ട്സ്, രണ്ട് തരത്തിലും നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഒരുപാട് ഇതിൽ നിന്ന് പിന്നെ രസകരമായ കഥകൾ കേൾക്കാനും അതിൽ നിന്ന് ലെസൺസ് കിട്ടാനും. ആൻഡ് സേ, let me welcome the ambassador to this Clubhouse series, and let me welcome all of the audience as well. And I think you'll all have a very, very enlightening, edifying, and entertaining experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajeev. That was very gracious and very kind and very well informed. We are both columnists for rediff.com, so we are very close to each other on many of our views, though we of course differ occasionally. But it's a knowledgeable and prepared kind of differences that we have had. But I always admire you for your technology and everything that you need to know about technology. I suppose you may have an opportunity to also talk to this audience. Well, I'll
Sure.
start
Thank you
with
very much.
with Yuval Harari. I don't know how many of you are following him. He is the most significant thinker of the 21st century. Professor of history, young man in the Jewish University in Jerusalem. And he has emerged as the person who is a prophet in terms of technology, in terms of politics, in terms of geopolitics. There is nothing that he does not know. You must have all heard about his book. If you go to YouTube and search for Yuval Harari, you can really open your minds to the world. Why I'm quoting him is because his theory is that the whole civilization from Neanderthal to today is built on storytelling as a storytelling, and then those stories become religion, becomes philosophy, it becomes morality, it becomes everything. But if you go back to it, it is somebody who just made a story, and he must have told it, not for him to have followers, but simply to entertain. And then it was so entertaining that people adopted it and started believing that this is so. So he says, for example, religion. What is religion other than storytelling? Has anybody seen any God anywhere? What is religion other than storytelling? Has anybody seen any God anywhere? But we all believe in the great achievements of or the great adventures of Sri Krishna. What is it? It is simply storytelling. So this is what I had in mind when I thought of this program. That is, through storytelling without the rigors of having to read history and philosophy and international affairs, to make you aware of the vast availability of these vast resources around us. And having been in the Foreign Service for about 37 years and spent abroad 40 years, traveled to no less than 100 countries, lived in about 14 countries. It's an experience I think is worth sharing. That's all that you can do now. At this age, you cannot do much more than worth sharing. And so that's why grandfathers tell tales. And the other person I'd like to mention is Sri TPS Menon Senior. When he decided to settle in Ottapalam, he started the storytelling about foreign affairs. And he's, of course, most delightful. He didn't speak much Malayalam, but in English, he was an astonishing storyteller. Somebody like Swami Chinmayananda, you must have all heard of. Spent days together continuously. Not because he was teaching Gita, we were least interested in Gita, but we are most interested in the stories that he told and relating it to the most fundamental religious precepts and concepts and so on. So when he came back, he started giving some lectures, Mr. KPS Menon people. Second day it became 200, then it became 600, then the hall could not accommodate the guests. Because that was the kind of experience he had right from the British days up to the Soviet Union. And the facility with which, because whenever he tells a story, his wife used to laugh. So we used to ask her, "Are you hearing this story for the first time?" Then she will wink at you and say, "No, this is the 200th time I'm hearing it." but she was so generous and kind to him. She will never say, "No, I heard this story. Now shut up." No. So in my mind, and so I sort of kind of formulated a thought when Sajeev said that we should make this into a regular program. And I thought what we could do is to make a combination of travelogue first of all, because travel is the most exciting part about diplomacy. If diplomacy was online, I would never have joined the Foreign Service. Now, like it is happening now. Now you look at the picture of the General Assembly, UN General Assembly, normally teeming with people. You won't have a chair there unless UN General Assembly, normally teeming with people. You won't have a chair there unless you have your own chair. But now there is not a single human being in the General Assembly Hall or Security Council. They're all sitting in their offices, and of course they are working, they are negotiating, they are doing everything. But it's not the same thing. See, the greatest thing about they are doing everything, but it's not the same thing. See, the greatest thing about the General Assembly is if you are there between, say, September and December any year, you cannot throw a stone without hitting a president or a prime minister or a foreign minister. And there is no protocol at the UN during the General Assembly. You can walk around. There is no protocol at the UN during the General Assembly. You can walk around and talk to any president or prime minister, and nobody will refuse. Nobody will say, go and take an appointment. In fact, most of the time, you won't even know who is sitting next to you because names are not important. Like as India, I had, of course, Iran on one side and Indonesia on the other. And most often it used to be a vice president or a foreign minister minimum sitting next to me. But we are all equals. You are representing your country and they are representing their country. And so the easiest form of communications, if you want to catch the Prime Minister of Finland, you can just walk across. Without that, what kind of diplomacy can you have? Online, talking to them or sending papers, etc. So that is the excitement. And that excitement is not only at the UN, but also wherever you go. It's all a new world each time, every 3 years. A new culture, a new language, expression. What is polite in Kerala is not polite in Nairobi. So this kind of culture shocks, and then you get used to it, and then you think that is the center of the world, and then suddenly you are sent off to a country which is and went to Bhutan. You can imagine Japan and Bhutan. There's no two countries which are more different from each other. Then went to Moscow. From Moscow, I came to Delhi. From Delhi, I went to New York for the first time. From New York, I went to Burma. Now it is Myanmar. Then from there, I came to Delhi to deal with the United Nations. Then I went to New York again a second time at a higher position as ambassador. And then, where did I go? I went to Nairobi and went back to 2004. So a lifetime will not be enough to tell these stories and experiences, particularly if you want to also sort of delve into the history and politics also. So I want to mix this up by telling you a story of my travels. That country was at that time. So let's say if we start with Japan. What was Japan in 1970? And what is Japan today? And what is the relationship that you had with Japan at that time and what is it now? It's a world of a difference. It's very difficult to fully analyze it. You need much more information, much more. But since I've been going to Japan even after I left in 1971, I know the changes which are taking place. Then, of course, since I follow international relations, I also know what changes are taking place in our bilateral relations. There may be gaps, but at this outer script. And that's what I expect to do. And I hope the audience will be interested and raise questions, because when there are gaps in it, questions are very important that you may not miss. And I must also remember the experience of having a channel. Safari channel series called Charitram Ennilude. എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ പ്രോഗ്രാം ഞാൻ വന്ന കാലത്താണ്, ആരെയൊന്നും പരിചയമില്ല. അപ്പം ജോർജ് കൊളങ്ങര എന്നെ വിളിച്ച് പറഞ്ഞു അങ്ങനെ ഒരു പ്രോഗ്രാമുണ്ട്. ശരി, I did not know what he had in mind. So he came and spent the whole day in my house in my office room and made me tell stories. And it went to, I think, about 7 or 8 episodes in 2 days. And it was fascinating because he had read my books, and so he knew what I had done. And if I missed, he had read my books, and so he knew what I had done. And if I missed something, he would immediately ask, what happened to that old lady who used to run to your home with gifts whenever there was a phone call. Because in Japan, you don't go empty-handed to any other house under any circumstances. Don't go empty-handed to any other house under any circumstances. So we used to live in the compound of a very rich Japanese family, husband and wife and children, and they had built a small house in a corner for one of their daughters. And she was also living in the house, so she decided for one of their daughters. And she was also living in the house, so she decided to rent it out. And I was the first occupant of a very nice little bungalow, very small, where I received people no less than Ashwati Tirunal, princess, and I don't know who came from Kerala for the princess, and I don't know who came from Kerala for the Expo 70. So, a funny story is, at that time, we didn't have a telephone yet. In the initial stages of our stay, that was still being installed. Even Japan had such problems. And then whenever there was a call for, and when he comes, she'll pick up something because she has to give you a gift if you come to your house, even to tell you that there is a phone call. Can you imagine that? So we had so many little pencils and little purses, and we wished we had more telephone calls coming because she was so generous and so kind. Such a story. Otherwise, for example, we had so many guests peeping in without any appointment, particularly youngsters, because the area where we lived in, there were hardly any foreigners. And the Japanese are fascinated by any foreigner. Of course, Americans are the best. They dream about America. But they know some half-baked ideas. But a foreigner who speaks English is a great attraction there. Because every Japanese wants to learn English, but they just cannot learn it. It's so tough. And so you will find youngsters coming to our house and say, "Can we talk to you?" In English. We'll come patiently and sit with you and we talk to them. And then that becomes a habit, people coming to you regularly. And that is how I learned all my Japanese. Of course, when I speak to them in Japanese, they are not very excited because they want to learn English and I want to learn Japanese. so there was a clash of, they will accept anything in order to get what they want. And so, I'm just telling you, there are so many stories like this. And that I thought we could, in a travelogue kind of way, we would trace that path. Travelogue kind of way, we would trace that path, the journey. And then, not to leave it at that, talk of the relationship at that time, the world history, how it was. 1970 was the climax of Japanese political and economic development, 1970. And they hosted the Expo 70 in Osaka, which was a show of Japan's prosperity. 1945, they're down in the dumps. And 1945, they're down in the dumps. And then in a short period, they had become a leader of the world, at least in commercial and economic activities. And so it was a show of their pride and their achievement and so on. And that was an eye-opener to all of us. Virtually every achievement and so on. And that was an eye-opener to all of us. Virtually everybody who could afford it from India came to Tokyo and went to Osaka. I don't know how many VIPs I escorted to go to. It was about a 3 hours drive or a train journey from Tokyo to Osaka. And so I got to see the Expo 70 many, many times. And my favorite story about Expo 70 is India's pavilion. Do you know what was in the India pavilion? We didn't have a single computer to show. We had except some pictures, we had nothing to show. And the only thing that we had, I don't know whose idea it was, that it became a white tiger pavilion. So this great India, huge India with variety and technology and culture and everything, had just one white tiger. Of course, it became a big attraction because everybody said, "Have you seen the white tiger in the Indian pavilion?" And then to Darjeeling tea free. So between these two, Indian pavilion became a big attraction. But we are pretty ashamed about it because every pavilion had industrial goods, the marvel of technology. But in 1970, we simply had nothing. Now, of course, if there is an expo in Osaka, there will be no white tigers there. Of course, the sari-clad women and Darjeeling tea may be still there because people would be interested in it. But we'll have so much to show because we have everything, even all these platforms that you. I think Murali is here. He has been talking about it. Murali Tumarukudi. He talks about the invention of a platform for communications. Now, most of the government communications are with that. Somebody sitting in Angamali or somewhere producing something like that. So we may have so much to show technology, but that was those were the days. And the attraction for our visitors and our politicians and all at that time was to see the geisha, for example. There is nothing which is more misunderstood in life, particularly for Indians, than the geisha. Understood in life, particularly for Indians, than the geisha. They think that they're some kind of glorified prostitutes, which they are not. That is one thing they don't do. They are the most cultured, most, trained hostesses. And it is a culture with them as to what they do, what they should do. And it is a culture with them as to what they do, what they should do, how they behave with you, how they, treat you. It's the ultimate in hospitality. But our leaders, particularly politicians, will tell me secretly, when does the interesting things happen? Particularly politicians will tell me secretly, when does the interesting things happen? It's okay, tea ceremony is all right, food is okay, but when are we going to have fun? So I said, after all that, we go home. So that was one of the attractions. And also it was Japan years in India. Many of you may. And also it was Japan years in India. Many of you may have heard about the movie called Love in Tokyo. And many of the songs, Love in Tokyo is very popular. And sayonara is a word that most people know because there is that song called Sayonara. Sayonara means you may know, everybody. Because there is that song called Sayonara. Sayonara means you may know, everybody will know that. Farewell. So how do you say farewell? And so there was some kind of India-Japan renaissance also at that particular period. So if you go like that, the 2 years, 2.5 years we spent at that particular period. So if you go like that, the 2 years, 2.5 years we spent there, so much to say. How you learn the language. I don't know how many of you will know that there are two kinds of Japanese languages. One for the men and the other for the women. Can you believe it? There is no such thing in the other for the women. Can you believe it? There is no such thing in the world in any other language. You don't have a men's version and the women's version. So what do you need to do when you go as a student? They will normally you will have a woman teacher because the ladies' language, a woman teacher because the ladies' language is closer to the written language than the men's language. Men's language is very rough, while the women's language is very soft and gentle, and they complete the sentences like in a book and so on. So the first 1 year or so, we always like in a book and so on. So the first 1 year or so, we always had lady teachers. Then we were asked to go to a man's class just to correct your Japanese when you speak to the public. Because the problem is that if you learn it only, then the person who hears you will immediately say, "Oh, did you learn your Japanese from your girlfriend?" Because you're using a woman's language. So you need to rectify it. You need to harden the vowels and harden the consonants and extend the vowels and so on. So the longest train, the fastest train in the world. Do you know that if the train gets late under any circumstances for more than 10 minutes, they pay you the fare back? Can you imagine? So most of us would get in the train and hope that this train gets late, but it'll arrive 2 minutes earlier. And, there's no end to these stories. And just giving you a flavor of what I want to do. And from there we went to Bhutan. Bhutan, we had only heard of it. I had no clue as to what Bhutan was like. And we discovered that it was like going, because we landed up in Bhutan in 1971, at the time of the Bangladesh war. You can imagine. Bhutan was just close to Bangladesh, and there were a lot of movements and troop movements and all that. And the first motor car went on to, till then they had no roads, no cars. And I took a Volkswagen 411, a green car with me. And as it happened, the king's brother, who is a very powerful man there, he had the same identical green Toyota 411. You can imagine the confusion. Toyota 411. You can imagine the confusion. Because there was no other green Toyota 411 in the whole country. And so when we drove around in in Bhutan, we got the best salute and the best treatment and best hospitality, because they all thought that we had something to do with the king's brother. And best hospitality, because they all thought that we had something to do with the king's brother. So, but what I'm saying is, in terms of interaction with people, Bhutan was 50 years behind. 50 years ago, Japan had fantastic cars, but not Bhutan. Years ago, Japan had fantastic cars, but not Bhutan. And then you pick up from there. You know, whatever little. The vegetables arrived in Thimphu only once a week, and there was no refrigerator at home. I mean, so hilarious. It's like, really, and it's like, really, and we had just come back from Japan with all the luxuries and all the comforts available. And then we are a little baby, 9-year-old. We had to wake him up, but there is no heating. So in the middle of the night when it is cold, when he wakes up, I have to first start and getting my firewood into a drum and light a fire to make the place comfortable for the baby to have his feed. So nobody would think that Indian Foreign Service you have to do such things. It's not probably in the Indian Army that you have their supporters there. And then to go on with it, and then you fall in love with Bhutan. And that is the amazing thing. Because every country has attractions which you cannot get anywhere else. And my favorite pastime in Bhutan was very thoughtful. When I was coming from Japan, he said, Srini, bring a full set of fishing tackles. I said, what am I going to do? And is he giving me a job, or is he making me his fisherman or what? So he sent me details. Buy all this and bring it along, and then you will enjoy your life better. Best advice I got. Like when I went to Burma, somebody said, please take a golf set. If I had not taken a golf set to Burma, it would have been the most boring life on earth. Because the only thing that the Burmese are excited is golf. Even President Nevin, he expected everybody to play, and he had his own private golf course. And he would invite ambassadors once a year to play in his golf course. It is nothing less than, if there is a golf course in heaven, it would be like that. You would not think that it's a developing country, the golf course and the festival. Everybody is a soldier in Burma. So they put on their uniform only once a year. But one person is a chief of protocol, another is the foreign secretary, the third one is a manager of a meat factory. No difference. They're all their own paraphernalia when they put on. So only on the army day is a major. And that they continue even today. There is no other country which is militarized so much. So you must all be wondering what are they doing with Aung San Suu Kyi? How do they control the country like this? Because the country is militarized completely. There is no recruitment to the civil service. But I'm not trying to give you a sequential story, but just to give you a flavor of what I expect to do. And for example, what is happening in Myanmar today, we cannot understand unless you have been there. Anyway, just to complete the Bhutan story, but it was always very tense because we are on the border of China. And China in a way, Bhutan is a kind of a buffer state between India and China. That is the significance of Bhutan, nothing else. And therefore, it has immense. Bhutan was of great interest to us. In fact, no other post have I been questioned so deeply and detailed by our armed forces and intelligence agencies as when I was in Bhutan. Because everything that happened there was great interest, and there were so many palace intrigues. The king had a mistress, a Tibetan mistress, can you imagine? And how do you handle that? So, former Foreign Secretary T.N. Cowell was a great friend of the family, and he was an advisor, he was a mentor. So he will land up every few days. He was a mentor. So he will land up every few days to settle a quarrel between the king and the queen. So, I mean, amazing. Such experience I don't think anybody will have anywhere else. And then suddenly the king died. And that too in very circumstances. He was only 46 or so. And that too in very circumstances. He was only 46 or so. And he had gone to Kenya, where I went much later. And that's how I first heard about Kenya, on a safari. And somewhere in the wilderness, he couldn't get even proper medical aid. He had a heart attack and he died. And he had only a 14-year-old son to succeed. And I was wondering, what did this boy do? He was a football player all the time. He would come to our home, talk to us, very easygoing. And I was wondering, what will he do as a king? But horror of horrors, or pleasure of pleasures, or surprise of surprises. I went down to Indian airport, that's only where the flight comes, to receive the new king. And we were calling him, his pet name and so on. And I was receiving the king of Bhutan for the first time by a Government of India official. And I had this scarf in my hands. And I was virtually shivering as to what will I do with this young boy. He came down the plane. And he did not bat an eyelid. He did not even indicate that we were friends. Nothing. He was so formal. And when I called him, Your Majesty, for the first time, he accepted it. Can you believe it? He didn't say, pat on my shoulder. And so then we had this whole process of settling him in, the process of making him understand, because King had a great vision about India-Bhutan relations and so on. So, and then he became, and then the King's cremation was a great story. Depending on this grade and his importance, his body is kept for a long time before it is cremated. Can you believe it? And since he's the king, he had to be kept alive, as it were, for 100 days. And I suspect this is a trick by the lamas, alive, as it were, for these 100 days. All the lamas will be fed from day to night in the palace. They live there, they looked after everything. And even you should see the dead body. Dead body is kept in such a way as though he is alive. So all that he liked, his food, and even the cigarette, the king used to smoke. So everybody religiously would sit there and light the cigarette whenever it goes off. And it will be burning like more important than a candle was the king's cigarette, because he couldn't live without a cigarette. More important than a candle was the king's cigarette, because he couldn't live without a cigarette. And then the lamas decided where to cremate him. And they found a godforsaken mountain, somewhere about 2 hours helicopter flight from Thimphu. And Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi from Thimphu. And Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi decided to come. Can you believe what we went through? In a village, there is nothing except a forest. And Mrs. Gandhi decided to stay 3 nights there. So my job, stay 3 nights there. So my job as the number 2 in the mission was run up and down to this place called Kurje. to see that at least she has a comfortable bed to sleep on. Of course, they gave whatever was possible, but most of them were made of leaves and roots and things like that. Of leaves and roots and things like that. Of course, Ms. Gandhi was very gracious and she accepted all that. And then, of course, suddenly I was told to go to Moscow. You can imagine the difference. What is Moscow and what is Bhutan and what is Japan? And we landed up in Bhutan, in Moscow, at the highest winter. And we took an Air India flight from Delhi. And the winter is very dangerous to fly around in the Soviet Union. And we had the taste of that. My God, it was bumping like hell. And there was no sign of anything except snow all around. And so Soviet Union is one country where at one part of the world it is 50 degrees plus. Another part of the country is 50 degrees minus. So you can imagine the kind of union. There is nothing more important than vodka. Anything that you say, suppose you say that you have a headache, anybody will say, okay, don't worry, just rub some vodka on your forehead, right? Or of course, drinking vodka is the answer for all questions because you forget everything else. And, cars will freeze if you put normal water. So they put vodka in it. And for this cleaning of the air windshield, it is vodka because then the snow will melt faster. So my theory about and Soviet Union collapsed because he's controlled the production of vodka. This is true. I can swear. Nobody writes in history like that. But he thought that the people are getting drunk and they're losing their direction and so on. He cut vodka by 50%, then by 60%. Like not having beer in Kenya. Kenya, it is like that. You stop the beer factory, the government will fall tomorrow. They don't drink beer in bottles or cans. They drink it in cases. So if you have 4 people sitting there, they'll have 4 cases there. And that is how they drink beer. Suppose there is... So it is the same thing. The Soviet power revolved around vodka. And the diplomacy was all vodka. Because everything goes on the basis of toast. Okay? So you sit down, food is served in relations between India and the Soviet Union. Okay. And then you drink, you don't just sip and keep it down. It's called dadna, bottoms up. So in the old days, you used to drink and then throw the glass backwards. But that was an expensive business. So now these days, they don't throw the glass, but they save the glass, but vodka isn't a reason to drink your vodka. So immediately somebody said, let us toast to the beautiful women of India. Okay, there goes. And then somebody said, let us drink to the beautiful women of Soviet Union. So this will go on, and by the time we start business, nobody knows anything going on. So if anybody thinks that these parties, we do any business, forget about it. Because we are so friendly and they kiss each other, tell stories and how he went to see the Taj Mahal. There's no end to it. So there's no end to it. So that is the kind of thing that is a culture in other places. Fiji, for example, it is opposite. It is the opposite of alcohol. Can you think of something which is the opposite of alcohol? There is something called kava. Something which is the opposite of alcohol. There is something called kava. It is made of a root like our tapioca. It's a thinner root. Okay? And you know tapioca's taste. So what they do is, the taste is also similar to tapioca, but it is thinner. What they do is they dry this root, so similar to tapioca, but it is thinner. What they do is they dry this root and make it into a powder and put it into water with a muslin cloth. So you put it in a muslin cloth and then keep on stirring. And they have these coconut shells as cups. And so you sit around, and they have these coconut shells as cups. And so you sit around this huge container with a lot of kava, and everybody puts the coconut cup into the drink and then keep on drinking. And what happens when you drink? I don't know how many of you have read Lord Tennyson's Lotus Eaters. You know, he comes across a tribe called Lotus Eaters on an island. And what they are doing is all the time they are eating something called lotus, not our lotus, some kind of a fruit. And what happens is, entices them and make them very, not only sleepy, but also very happy. So they have no problems about each other. Everything is wonderful. So Tennyson talks about an ideal world, you know, where he has that famous line, strive to seek, to find. So these people have no such ambition to strive, and that is lotus eaters. Same thing happens in Fiji. When you drink this, your body becomes numb. And then you start thinking, why am I fighting with this man? Why are we having this problem with India? Why are we having this? And then they completely forget everything else. And only you leave the place. You must finish that kava, the whole of it. Otherwise, you are not a friend. And that reminds me of a story in Bhutan, where you are supposed to give 2 drinks to even your enemy. Right? So if you leave after 1 drink, you are an enemy. That is fair enough. So you should have 2 drinks, whatever it is, coffee or tea or alcohol, whatever. You are not a good guest. So similarly here, unless you finish that whole container, your party is not over. And then, of course, the eating starts and on. And that has been the problem with Fiji, with the Indians. Indians, as you know, 50%. That's why India has a big mission there. And we have lots of responsibilities. But the Indians have become so numb about their own, welfare and their own requirements that they would concede anything to the Fijians. When the 1970 Constitution was formed, somebody suggested that why should one man have one vote? Why don't have the Fijians all vote for Fijians, Indians all vote for Indians? What a stupid democracy is that? And they all came, Indians all vote for Indians. What a stupid democracy is that? And they all came to Mrs. Gandhi and said, this is the only way we can run there. You cannot have one man, one vote, which means all the Indians will be in power all the time. And that will not be acceptable. So let us give them the power. We don't want power. We came here to cut cane and make a living. Give them the power. We don't want power. We came here to cut cane and make a living. Now our children are in Australia, New Zealand, UK, USA. We have nothing to lose. So why do you want to run the country? Let the Fijians run the country. We'll make the money and send it to the children. And Mrs. Gandhi agreed to a racist constitution. Mrs. Gandhi agreed to a racist constitution. Can you believe it? I mean, and that too in 1970. It's very recent times. The constitution says 24 Fijians, 24 Indians, 7 others. Which means what? The 7 others will support the Fijians all the time, so the Indians will never come to power. Then what happened was, of course, the Indians voted like Indians. But some modern Fijians voted with the Indians and got the Indians a majority. Violation of the constitution. And an Indian dominated government was sworn in, which was not envisaged. And then suddenly a military coup took place. Imagine military coup in a place like Fiji. You cannot imagine that. Because everybody knows everybody else. So the coup leaders had to wear masks because they did not want to be identified. So hired treasury benches and took them to some place. We thought they'll be slaughtered. But there is no such thing as violence in Fiji. So they took the coup leader called the Prime Minister's wife and said, I'm bringing some guests to your house. So she said, how many guests? Make arrangements. They're going to stay with you. So this lady got so shocked. And so the guests included her husband, who was also a prisoner. And they were accommodated there. And not a single drop of blood was shed. This whole revolution, this military coup. In fact, there were 3 to our house. So I called the military commander, who happened to be my golf partner. Thank God for that. and said, what do I do with these Indians? They are scared. Are you going to kill them? They said, Your Excellency, you keep them in your house. Nobody will touch them. Whoever is afraid, keep them in your house. Don't let them into the street. You know what house? Staying the whole night. How do you feed them? I told them, please bring all your rations. You can cook it here. And we had a fabulous party that night. And the coup, everybody is scared. In Delhi, people are calling and asking, what's happening there? What are you doing about it? And we were enjoying ourselves. So, things are out of you. You must be thinking, yeah, I'm exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating anything. I'm only saying it in a disjointed manner to make you interested. So that's it. So like that. So from Moscow, I went back to Delhi. First time in the Ministry of External Affairs, getting to know what is the Foreign Secretary. Because the Foreign Secretary had come to Moscow and he had taken a fancy for me for I don't know for what. So he called me back to work in his office. And so I was in a kind of elevated status. I was a poor deputy secretary, but I was dealing with secretaries, ministers, prime minister's secretary, and so on. And it was a kind of fascinating. In fact, if I take my entire career and when was I making policy or when was I closest to policy, is those 3 years when I was deputy secretary to the foreign secretary. Because the most secret documents, top secret intelligence report, everything landed up. And the foreign secretary read nothing unless I read and marked things to be seen by him. Because he can never read everything that comes. But I had to read everything because he will raise his hand and say, what is this? So I have to immediately within 2 minutes say what it is. And of course, he was a brilliant man, so there was no need for him to convince about anything. But his only problem was he will write something and ask me to get it typed. There were no computers those days. And I had about an army, about 12 stenographers. And they'll produce this. And then I'll go back to him with all the corrections. Then he'll look at it and says, and then I'll go back to him with all the corrections. Then he look at it and says, which idiot wrote this piece of paper? So that's like, how can I say you are the idiot? But it was such a delight working with him with all this. But that was, of course, all the stories we cannot tell. All the stories we cannot tell. But all the dramatic things in life happened at that time. The change of government, Morarji Desai as Prime Minister. Even if I talk telling about Morarji Desai stories, we can spend the whole evening together. Then Charan Singh becoming Prime Minister, who is not interested in foreign affairs. The only foreign country he has visited is Sri Lanka. And so many conferences, summit in Cuba, then Commonwealth heads of government in Lusaka, New York General Assembly. He went to nothing. He went nowhere. And he picked up a foreign minister who was absolutely clueless about any of these things. My biggest problem was managing the foreign minister, nothing else. But it was hard, and he had to be satisfied. He was very opinionated, because he was at one time Parliamentary Secretary Jawaharlal Nehru. I never realized Jawaharlal Nehru could have picked up a young man like him. And so he was very opinionated. He would say, Pandit Nehru told me this. What the hell are you talking about? That kind of this thing. He has a history of throwing files at people. Fortunately, he didn't throw a file at me. He did everything. And I was very happy when I moved out of that office. So the Foreign Secretary office, Foreign Minister, Prime Ministers, all over the place, traveling with Prime Ministers. That itself is a long story. That's the story of Dushasana Vadam in Moscow. Because everybody knows how Dushasana Vadam is performed. So there was this Kerala Kalamandalam troupe. And Morarji was Prime Minister, Vajpayee was Foreign Minister. Neither of them had ever seen a Kathakali performance, nor the ambassador. So this performance, Bhima putting Dushasana in his lap and pulling out his entrails and drinking his blood and putting it around his neck like a... Can you believe it? They didn't understand what this was all about. So the program was over mercifully after half an hour. And they all jumped at me because I was the only Keralite present there, and I was the junior most. Who brought these fellows here? That was the first question. I said, I don't know. Indian Council for Cultural Relations has sent this troop. Okay, but why are you doing this? What is this? Is this troop? Okay, but why are you doing this? What is this? Is this India? Is this peaceful nation that we are about? You didn't have anything else to show. You should have had a Kathak, you had this, that. So I made the mistake of trying to rationalize it. I told Morarji Bhai, sir, you need to understand, trying to rationalize it. I told Morarji Bhai, sir, you need to understand the whole story. I'm sure you know the Mahabharata story, etc. And so the crimes that this man has done to the Pandavas is such that he deserves that punishment. So it's such that he deserves that punishment. So he looked at me and said, but what have the Soviets done to punish them? I say, things like that. Because Mr. Vajpayee was a little more tolerant, and he said, okay. इनको nahi, he said, okay. इनको nahi भेज दीजिए anywhere. Don't send this Kerala Kalamandalam troop to any country in the world. That was the only decision he took at that particular moment. Anyway, so that was Moscow. Then Moscow, you can imagine the changes that took place when Mrs. Gandhi, because they had never told their audience in Pravda and the Isvestia, 2 newspapers, the word Morarji Desai or this political party, etc., was never mentioned. It was all about Mrs. Gandhi winning the election, running the country for many more years. And then suddenly results came. They lose too. So you know what the formula they devised? In Soviet Union, the elections are based on a minimum number of votes you have to get. Not that you lose because you get less than your opponent, but because you haven't got the certain percentage, say 70% or 80%. So first 2 days, Pravda and Iswas India. And on the third day, they said Mrs. Gandhi, a small little item, saying that Mrs. Gandhi did not get the number of votes required for winning, which means she has no opponent. All right. Then the next day, a feature appeared about Morarji Desai, a great Gandhian, a congressman, believes in everything. Nobody could believe what had happened. And I remember Mr. Gromyko, the veteran diplomat, foreign minister for 17 or 18 years, longest serving foreign minister in history. He was invited to Delhi soon after this. This man was nervous because he didn't know anything. And he thought they might just, cut him into pieces and eat him when he reaches Delhi. He was so nervous, I can't tell you what will happen there. He kept on asking the ambassador, who is what. And he was so anxious because they thought that India had gone to the dogs. That was their full conviction, and the best friends of Soviet Union had. And then you should have seen Gromyko coming back. He was laughing and smiling because Vajpayee told him in his banquet speech, he said, Your Excellency, you don't know us. In his banquet speech, he said, Your Excellency, you don't know us. But we are all the same. Whether it is Congress, Communist, BJP, all of us are same as far as Soviet Union is concerned. So relax. You can tell us whatever you want, and you are our friend. And that is when Gromyko heaved a sigh. Whatever you want, and you are our friend. And that is when Gromyko heaved a sigh of relief. And then all that happened afterwards, and things like that. And then Moscow, so Delhi, I told you. I went to New York. My first encounter with multilateral diplomacy. I had no clue what was multilateral diplomacy is about. How do you deal with 193 countries every day? Have you ever deal with 193 countries every day? Do you have any clue? Because Murali may know the technique because he does that in Geneva. And can you imagine a group of 193 countries taking a decision on a subject? 193 people cannot take a decision. So completely bewildered, everybody assured me that no, you will learn. First of all, I thought it was all a waste of time because from the Foreign Secretary's office to Permanent Mission of India in New York is a come down in any circumstances because there you are dealing with policy. You know, Foreign Minister's visit to China for the first time after 19. You come and sit in a room of 193 countries and trying to draft something, and you change because there is no agreement. You suggest a little word, and when it's accepted, you feel so elated. And when somebody says that's all rubbish, then you feel very sad. And at the end of the week, end of the day, 6 hours of negotiation, some words in brackets, some words this way, that way. And this struggle, I said, what is this worth? What was I doing before and what am I doing here? And after 1 year, I would never exchange that job for anything else. It's so fascinating, it's so entertaining, so absorbing. And that little word, that word will be quoted. Nobody will know where it came from. I tell you just one example. There is a principle in the UN that the consent of the parties are concerned for any kind of deployment ping forces between us. Say like India and Pakistan. Whatever UN does, they need the consent of both the parties. Okay. So this was a big hurdle for us because we want to throw out the UN peacekeeping force in Kashmir. Do you know that there's still a UN peacekeeping operations in Kashmir? Do you know that there's still a UN peacekeeping operation between India and Pakistan? Can you believe it? You never hear about them. There are 34 soldiers from different countries of the world having a good time. They have nothing to do. They have headquarters in Islamabad. They have one in Delhi, for which we pay their, motor car allowance and hospital, which we pay their, motor car allowance and hospitality and all that. But we don't recognize them because they were supposed to come only for the ceasefire line. Now there is no ceasefire line between India and Pakistan. There is only a line of control. So we argued, we said, please remove them because there is no ceasefire line. So we argued, we said, please remove them because there is no ceasefire line, because their mandate says ceasefire line. So Pakistani said, no, we won't agree. And the UN said, please get them to agree. Till today, they have not agreed. Each year, we spend huge amounts of money on this troop. And in the year, we spend huge amounts of money on this troop. And in the administration and budget committee, we argue again and again. Why do you want to send this $3 million every year on this? Throw them out. And then the Pakistani guy will immediately raise his hand and says no. So when Boutros Ghali started a new negotiation on peacekeeping, we wanted to remove this somehow. So with the so there was a sentence which said that all decisions will be taken with the consent of the parties concerned. And we wanted to change it into party consent. No way, Pakistan will never agree to that. We will never agree to the plural. And all others, they have no interest. But they will throw in another phrase, another word, which both of us will reject equally. This went on forever. And then finally, I thought of a party, and within brackets, you write IES as an alternative. Okay? And then we read the way we want. Oh my God, you cannot imagine. People started jumping up and saying, oh, here comes India's wisdom of ages. all kinds of. And the Pakistanis agreed to that, to do this. So whenever this issue is raised, they will say, it says party is concerned. And when we say we were to party concerned. So nobody thought about anything else. But do you know the drama, the tense drama was the next day when the translation of this document was text is distributed in 5 languages. Whether anybody reads in that language or not, for example, Chinese delegation is the only one who reads Chinese. But every document has to be translated into Chinese, then only the Chinese will participate in the discussions. So otherwise they will say, sir, the Chinese text is not here, so we are walking out. And the Chinese text has to be walking out. And the Chinese text has to be brought from somewhere. They will never make a compromise on that. Similarly, the French. Anyway, the next day when the Arabic translation, Chinese translation came, there was no way this could be expressed. Only in English it's done. Maybe in French. So the only in English it's done. Maybe in French. So the interpreters came to us, to India and Pakistan. Please help us. What do we do? What is the way to say it? Because earlier we had tried party or parties. That is the only thing that they could do in Chinese and in Chinese and in Arabic. Do you know, finally the compromise was put that word in English even in the Chinese and Arabic versions. So even today, this is the solution. Is it a solution? No. Today, this is the solution. Is it a solution? No. Because these people are still there. But that was the only way to move. So some such idiotic, this of course an extreme example. But then it hits you. But then it hits you. And therefore, after that posting, I would have been happy to continue with UN postings everywhere, and I managed to get to 3 places. Not only 3, 4 places. New York once again, a second time I went. Then I went to Nairobi, where there are several unions. I came back to New York, and then went to Vienna, where there is multilateral agency. So my idea was to go to places where multilateral work is involved. So I managed to do that. I would say luck more than anything else. And the post was available at that time, because you are a multilateralist. So, but I'm the only one in the Foreign Service who's done largest number of multilateral postings. That is not only 4 postings, about 20 or 30 international conferences. So there's nobody who has the kind of experience I have. Of course, nobody acknowledges any of those things now. That's another story. I went to Burma. That is another story of adventure, and for which we can now see how I'll just tell you one story about Burma before we move on, because after that I went to Fiji. So the Prime Minister of Fiji, because he had heard about how the dictator was very tough and people were never refusing. There was only one revolt once, but after that people have been very quietly accepting what the leader was saying. So we used to play golf together. Mr. Ratumara, the Prime Minister, tall man, tough, Polynesian, but very gentle in his ways, very fond of Indians who are friendly with him. And he had a whole coterie of Indians all around him, etc. So we were having a chat, and so he wanted me to tell him about Burma, so he wanted me to tell him about Burma, stories about Burma. And then I was saying how things are all, it's a different world, the military dictates anything and everything. So, and after that, he was a bit in a thoughtful mood. And he told me, High Commissioner, in a thoughtful mood. And he told me, High Commissioner, how does this happen? How do these people accept a dictator like that for these years? Since 1962, he has been president. And he doesn't care about them. There is no parliament. There is no civilian, nothing. Care about them. There is no parliament. There is no civilian, nothing. How does he do? Then, for the first time, maybe I thought about it. I said, maybe because they are Buddhists. I said, Buddhists are very patient, and they have no ambitions. And they are always in communion with God and so on. So they are always in communion with God and so on. So I gave him a little explanation. But what happened was the most funniest thing that happened. So he's a tall man away from me, but he leaned towards me, and conspiratorially he tells in my ear, Mr. High Commissioner, why don't you take all these Indian Hindus back and send me Buddhists? You can imagine how the man's mind was working. He said, suppose I had this 50% of my population on Buddhists, I can rule this country for the rest of my life. His mouth, because of that. Anyway, so Burma was very interesting, but except that there was no work, because Burma doesn't have any relationship with neighbors. So they have a policy called policy of third countries, not third world countries. What is that? That means we don't deal with superpowers, we don't deal with neighbors. United States, no dealings with India, supposedly no dealings with China, which is all secret. But their friends were Germany, Italy, Denmark, South Korea, Japan. That's all. So third countries. You would never have heard about a policy like that, the so-called third country policy. So which means the Indians and play golf. That's all. And that is where the gossip is. All diplomats come there. Some of the Burmese also come there. You exchange jokes. And they have the standard jokes. When they start saying it, everybody starts laughing. And because they don't converse, they don't talk about policy or golf course. Because if you go to the office, they have to write a summary and make 20 copies and give it to all the army generals and so on. So they will always say, sir, I have no time to see you in my office. Then you say, how about golf this afternoon? He said, no problem. When do I book a tea of time for you? so, and then they can talk to you anything and everything. Even if you want to do some business with them, they can do all that. And meanwhile, you enjoy your golf and improve your golf also, because it's a very nice place to learn golf. Because there is no rush, except that you have to wake up, learn golf. Because there is no rush, except that you have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and line up if you want to come back to office. So 18 months I was in charge, and then a new ambassador came. And so he was telling me what I did. I said I was playing golf all this time. So he said, my God, I don't play golf. So what do I do? Golf all this time. So he said, my God, I don't play golf. So what do I do? So I said, you can do whatever you want. You can start golf, learn tomorrow. He said, no, I'm too old. Dr. P Sreenivasn, very philosopher, writer of books and all that. He said, okay, I'll write books. What you do is you play golf, collect all the information, and send reports to Delhi as you used to do. Collect all the information and send reports to Delhi as you used to do. And I'll continue. He wrote 2 or 3 books, I think, during his 3 years there. And I left soon afterwards, because I was already an ambassador for 18 months. So the government thought it is not appropriate for me to work for another ambassador in the same place. So they sent me off to ambassador in the same place. So they sent me off to Fiji on my first ambassador lesson. So many stories about Burma. The Indian community was very fascinating because they were all thieves. Because all the legitimate Indians were thrown out. 1 million out in 1962. And all the Indians who made compromise with the Burmese in business ways and become their black marketeers and then business partners, they were allowed to stay on. So in a few thousands. And then the paddy farmers were kept, because Burmese did not know how to grow. Paddy farmers, I'll tell you their stories later, were left behind. And these people accepted whatever the military was doing. In fact, they were serving the military as well. But they were very fond of old stories. You bring a movie from India, Mughalai Assam or something, and show it in the ad. It used to be the house of the State Bank of India. You can imagine, State Bank of India manager in Burma was a big guy. And that became the ambassador's residence. 23 rooms it has, and about 8 acres of land. And so we can have any show, anything there. And every Indian will. So my basic job was playing golf and organize these shows. And there are only 2 newspapers, both were identical. So you didn't need to read 2, you only read 1 newspaper, both published by the army. And what is there in it? Some speech made by the big Leo. Reporting on those newspapers did not take more than 10 minutes. Then what you could report was there are always stories. Diplomats make their own stories as to what happened to Nevin, what is he doing with his mistress. And so after every cocktail party, you can come home and send a telegram home to Delhi. So Delhi people will think that you are working very hard on all this work. And then suddenly, I have this fate of getting into serious problems or in a peaceful land. So Burma was very peaceful, nothing happened. But suddenly Mrs. Gandhi was shot on October 31st, I think. And I was happily playing golf in a place called Pagan, about 3 hours away from... I had to come back. And there was no way to come back. The flight had already gone. And I drove the whole night because I thought General Nevin may go to Delhi and Delhi will ask where the hell is the chap, the charge d'affaires, as I was called. And so I had to reach there before morning, before everybody knew what was happening. what is Nevin want to do? Because Nevin always says, Mrs. Gandhi is my sister, Gandhi family, he used to send gifts to them. Yet she had nothing to do with, he would not deal with India or the Indian ambassador, but Mrs. Gandhi family was very fond of. So we knew he would do something very significant, asking them what is the general's plan. Nothing. They don't know anything, they will not say anything. Then next morning I see a report that he has taken off from Burma to an unknown destination. Nobody knew where he had gone. Then naturally the story spread that he has gone to Delhi. So what do we do? Intimation. So I told Delhi, this is what I hear. He may have gone somewhere else. But if he lands up, please, this is what he looks like. Take care of him. And then the Thai Prime Minister landed up there. They thought he was Nevin. And so they started. So a report also came, Nevin has arrived in Delhi. I was even more flabbergasted. So a report also came, Nevin has arrived in Delhi. I was even more flabbergasted. I called the protocol. They said, we don't know. He took off. He may have gone anywhere. He's a free man and all that. Then we were told that no, he has not gone to Delhi. He is in the country, but he has gone to an island to meditate. He is in the country, but he has gone to an island to meditate for Mrs. Gandhi for 3 days. Because he said that I'm so overstricken by grief that I cannot live in Rangoon anymore. And so he went there and meditated and came back. Then finally I got a message from him there and meditated and came back. Then finally I got a message from him that once everything is settled and when Rajiv Gandhi is free, I'd like to go and see my nephew. He's my nephew, so I must go and condole with him. Well, that was manageable. By then all the dignitaries had left. After a week, it was manageable. By then all the dignitaries had left. After a week after Mrs. Gandhi's destination, I went with him to Delhi, and we had a very good visit. And you will not believe it how affectionate he was to Rajiv Gandhi. He would not leave his hands or his shoulders and tell him, you are my nephew, anything that you want. And tell him, you are my nephew, anything that you want in Burma, anything that you want in this world, blah, 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 blah. And I was so happy. I said, from tomorrow, India-Burma relations will be dramatically changed. So only Foreign Secretary was there, S. Gotra, and so he said, my dear, your job is now cut out for you. Big jump. And so get ready, give up your golf and all that. A lot of work to do. I said, sir, I'll be very happy because you have been paying me for nothing. So let me do that. So Nevin went back and I followed. And I called a press conference in Rangoon to tell them about this meeting and how and everything, trade, technology, blah, blah, blah. All that we discussed in Delhi. So everybody said, yeah, very nice, very nice. Then nothing. Total silence. Every day I would chase the South Asia department. Sir, we don't know anything. We will call you when it happens. Till I left, nothing happened. No India-Burma relations. And I left, of course. And Nevin was still alive when I left. So Fiji, I already told you. Then Fiji, of course, I had the most. We decided not to recognize the government. For the first 5 days, I had no contact with the government because they cut off my phones. So all the ambassadors called in by the general. He was a colonel, but he had become a general overnight. The dictator called her colonel. He was. So we are only about 14 ambassadors. We were all called. And he told us the story, how he had to do this for the sake of the country. There's nothing against Indians, blah, blah. The usual speech that every coup maker does. And everybody else said, I was the only one who knew Rambuka. Everybody else said, I was the only one who knew Rambuka. But he did not recognize me. As I went in, he didn't say, hi, Srini, how are you? He didn't say that. He just looked very sternly at me, so which meant that I'm not supposed to show that I'm friendly with him. And then he asked around and said, do you have any questions with him? And then he asked around and said, do you have any questions? So nobody asked. Most of the ambassadors were senior to me, but nobody opened his mouth. Then I raised my hand and I said, I'm very concerned about my people here. The Indians here are 50% people here. But my people here, the Indians here are 50% people here, and what you have done is undercutting democracy and making these feel uncomfortable. So what is that you will tell me to tell them? Then you know what he said, Mr. High Commissioner, they are not your people, they are my people. Then you know what he said, Mr. High Commissioner, they are not your people, they are my people. I'll take care of them. You don't have to worry. Okay, I said, very good. But then I asked a second question. When are you going to, because you told us to report to our governments about what you told us. But when are you going to give us our phone lines back? Because we cannot report anything. We had only a teleprinter and phones, nothing else. No fax, no internet, nothing. So he said, don't worry, Mr. High Commissioner, when you reach your office, your phone will be working. And it was not working for the next 3 days. So I had no way to communicate with them. My policy was to continue as I was before, as though nothing happened. Because our basic approach was to continue the multiracial democratic contacts. So I did not even go to visit the Prime Minister in his prison. Many people could visit him. But I didn't want to take a partial position. So what I did was, I went and met the Governor General, because Governor General was still in place. And started talking to him, and we started a talk as to how to settle this, etc. Because it's all a long story. And the only way I managed to talk to Delhi was there was an Austrian go and make a call to Delhi once a day. So we managed that. Nobody else knew. The army did not know. And how to communicate, because if I speak in English or Hindi, everybody in Fiji knows. So I had to speak in Malayalam. So several Malayalam-knowing officers were deployed in the Foreign Secretary's office to talk to me. Shankarai, all of them. So they were translating to the Foreign Secretary as I told them in Malayalam whatever was happening. But then the Foreign Secretary told me the bad news. He said, what you are doing is wrong. The Prime Minister wants you to stand up and fight for the Indians. Oh, I said, well, nobody told me that. So I'm still talking about multi-racialism, the world as it should be. All that's rubbish. And they were all in jail. There was threat to their life. The army, the Fiji army is trained in the UN peacekeeping operations in Mount Sinai, where they're very tough with the Palestinians. So there are all kinds of ways in which to fires and all these techniques they had learnt from a UN peacekeeping operation. You can believe it or not. So they were very tough, but they did not hurt anybody. And their protests, they used to protest against me by coming to my house and sitting there and sing prayers to God or read the Bible and say nothing as I pass. And then again they'll start singing songs and of course saying that India is not helping us and all kinds of things. Anyway, but to cut the story short, they kept me for 2 years like that. I did not recognize the government, but they could not throw me out because they knew that there would be a revolt. They tolerated all my letters to the editor, everything. And no communication with the government. I would go to permanent secretaries, but not to the ministers. I would play golf, but not with the ministers. All this a stupid story. And I was supposed to be an ambassador to that country. So I changed mission. There is no such designation. But Delhi approved of it. And then suddenly they told us that you all have to call yourself ambassadors from today because Fiji is out of the Commonwealth. Because we threw them out of the Commonwealth. Can you imagine? So after 2 years, there was a guru, what is it called, Gurudwara, which was burnt by some people. All this, all because of the same political situation. And the Guru Granth Sahib was partly damaged. This is the worst that can happen to a Sikh, was partly damaged. This is the worst that can happen to a Sikh group. Because Guru is a Guru. They think that Granth is live. And so they have to have a cremation. And can you believe thousands of people came from Canada, from UK, from USA to attend this? Because in history, in living history, this has never happened. That a Granth Sahib has been destroyed by somebody. So they all came ready to take over Fiji and destroy all the Fijians. That was, you can imagine, angry to take over Fiji and destroy all the Fijians. That was, you can imagine, angry Sardajis. So I had this huge job of somehow pacifying them. And this place was 3 hours away from my home. So I was in a hotel. And the Sardajis came and said, "You tell us, sir, what you want us to do. We'll take over this." Came and said, "You tell us, sir, what you want us to do. We'll take over this wretched country." I said, "Nothing doing." I told them that this is not against your religion. It was very difficult to convince them, but I told them that this is. And I said, "I will speak for you. None of you will make any public statement at this ceremony. I'll speak." So they don't know where they were, in this wilderness. So they all agreed only the High Commissioner will speak at the funeral and only the priest will do the rest. And I thought that I would say something which will pacify them. I told them the same thing, that this is not against your religion. This is a political problem. This is a race problem. This is an so Sikhism is not going to die here. You bring us a new Granth Sahib, we will keep it here, everything will go on. All these assurances I told them. And I thought I had made peace. So I slept in that hotel and left the next morning driving back to Suva, the capital where I was. And it said that the High Commissioner or the Ambassador had made a highly inflammatory speech, and so we have decided to expel him. So this was a Friday, and I was still going home. They could not find me in Suva. And Saturday and Sunday was Diwali. So Saturday, Sunday, let him have peace of mind. No peace of mind because all the Indians were in our house and planning what to do, what they will do, etc. And then we made a trick. I called up the Foreign Secretary and said, "We have to do something because it should not appear that I've been expelled." We know this kind of a notice you never get in diplomacy. They tell you to leave in such and such time. But here they knew, they had taken the decision, but they had not announced it. So the Foreign Secretary made a big dramatic announcement that so-and-so has been transferred back to headquarters, and because of his long experience in the UN, he'll be the head of the UN division. No joint in the UN, he'll be the head of the UN division. No joint secretary's appointment has ever been reported by the Foreign Secretary to anybody. And it will not even come in the newspapers. Such an insignificant thing. So anybody who knew anything about foreign service and foreign policy knew there was something wrong. Because this is most unusual. And foreign policy knew there was something wrong. Because this is most unusual. Net 9 o'clock lead story. Indian ambassador is returned to be Joint Secretary UN. And we also managed to get my colleague who was Consul General in Sydney to be transferred to Fiji because we didn't want to leave the mission in Sydney. To be transferred to Fiji because we didn't want to leave the mission without a head. So my own batchmate was transferred at midnight. He was going to India for Diwali. So I called him up. He was my batchmate. I told him, "Baby, come here, take the next flight. You won't be called ambassador, but doesn't matter. You'll have enough fun here." So you won't be called ambassador, but doesn't matter. You'll have enough fun here. So he landed up on Sunday as my deputy. And they couldn't say anything because to have a member of the mission, you don't need agreement. But if you want to appoint him as an ambassador, you need an agreement. So he took over. I handed over everything to him and was ready to be told to leave. So I was summoned around 10 o'clock by the Foreign Secretary and said, "Unfortunately, Mr. Ambassador, you need to leave in 72 hours. So I was surprised why they gave me 72 hours. So I said, "Fine, my baggage is packed because you gave me these 2 wonderful days. But can I leave my wife here? Live here as long as she wants. No problem, but you must leave in 72 hours. I said, "Fine." I agreed and walked out. And I told the press that 72 hours they're given me, but I will leave in 48 hours because I want to come back one day to Fiji as a tourist. So I'm leaving behind my 24 hours. And my son were in Fiji for 12 days. And I had nothing to do in Sydney, at a lovely hotel and golf. While my wife was struggling with his packing, she would cry every day, "Why have you left us like this?" Blah, blah, blah. But I had a good time. 12 days they came and we went worth a whole book. Then, of course, in the ministry as Joint Secretary UN, dealing with all multilateral stuff. Then back to New York as Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative. No change. Everything that I was doing in Delhi, I had to do from New York. And I get very fascinated. Of course, after New York, you cannot go to a good place because you have to alternate between A, B, C stations and all that. So they would have wanted me to go to Africa or at least Argentina or something like that. But I said, I'm retiring after this. So how can you send me to Argentina or Africa or anything like that? You give me another multilateral. Geneva and Vienna were available, but Geneva had 2 ambassadors. So I didn't want to go there. You will be fighting with the other ambassador all the time. One for disarmament and one for the rest of the UN. So I said I avoid that. And this is nuclear issues, very important. So I opted for Vienna. And that is when I left the service. Of course, my stories didn't end. I went through all kinds of things. But that is outside the agenda. So this is the story I'm going to tell you. I hope you have had a glimpse of or a taste of what I think I've taken all the time because we intend to stay only for 2 hours. And I didn't give you any opportunity to open your mouth. That is the problem with professors and diplomats. But would have done that. We would not have stopped him. But anyway, thank you all for your patience. And if there are some quick questions before 7 o'clock, I'm sure Sajeev will give you the... Oh yes, our moderator has come. Vaishakh is here. So maybe Vaishakh will take over and conduct the business after this by 8 o'clock if possible. Without, of course, cutting off anybody. Okay, Vaishakh?
Okay, sure, sir. Okay, so thank you, sir. ഒരു വലിയ ലോങ് ജേണി ആയിരുന്നു സാറിൻ്റെ ജീവിതത്തിലൂടെയും ഒരു ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റിൻ്റെ റിയൽ ലൈഫിലൂടെയൊക്കെയുള്ള ഒരു നമ്മുടെ ഒരു ഹിസ്റ്ററിയിലൂടെ തന്നെ കടന്നു പോകുന്നു. ഒരു വളരെ സുദീർഘമായ ഒരു ഹിസ്റ്ററി പോകുന്നു. അതിനോടൊപ്പം വ്യത്യസ്തമായ രാജ്യ
Vaishakh, your voice is breaking.
Yeah, I can't hear him also. Maybe something wrong with the system. Is anybody else hearing him? I don't hear him.
No,
Sajeev.
no.
Is anybody else hearing him? I don't hear him.
No,
Sajeev.
no.
Sajeev, you can possibly take over and moderate.
Yeah, maybe your mic may be better.
ഹലോ സർ, കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ?
Or Shaijuman can get it. Shaijuman's mic is okay?
Yes. Vaishakh.
Why don't Shaijuman's mic is okay?
Yes. Vaishakh.
Why don't...
ഇപ്പൊ കേൾക്കാമോ?
കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ സാർ ഇപ്പോൾ?
ഇപ്പൊ കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ട്.
ഓക്കെ സാർ.
All right, then you continue.
സോ സം നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് പ്രോബ്ലംസ് ആണ് സാർ. സോ ഞാൻ കൂടുതൽ കിടക്കുന്നില്ല. ഇപ്പോൾ സാർ വളരെ ഒരു സാറിൻ്റെ ആ ഒരു ഇത്രയും നാളത്തെ ഗ്ലോബ് ട്രോട്ടിങ്ങിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ളൊരു ഓവർവ്യൂ ആണ് പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്തത്. ഫ്രം ഭൂട്ടാൻ ടു മേ ബി അപ് ടു ന്യൂയോർക്ക് വരെ വരുന്ന, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വിയന്ന വരെ വരുന്ന ആ ഒരു ലൈഫിലെ ഒരു ജസ്റ്റ് ഒരു മെയിൻ ടോപ്പിക്സ്
Now he has gone off.
Yes.
So maybe something wrong with his mic.
Yes, sir. Actually,
let's not wait.
to say a few words about this initiative.
Right.
Sir, amazing. It's so wonderful to hear you as usual every time. Your narration about various incidents with all those emotions. When we hear you about what are, it's like you are telling us like that we are just feeling right now. So that kind of emotions that you are just like you just shared with us, it's wonderful, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful initiative, and I congratulate and compliment for this, because us to understand about various permutations and combinations which is there in international diplomacy. When you try to deal with such kind of situations, like what kind of challenges that you face, what kind of somebody else would have told such things, like maybe they would have written a lot of books, but when you talk, when you express, when you say these things to us, it's kind of like we are just feeling that is the greatest advantage that we have. Maybe in bilingual അതർ ബിക്കോസ് ഈ മലയാളത്തിലാണെന്ന് ഉള്ള രീതിയിലാണ് സജീവ് അനൗൺസ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പം അതുകൊണ്ട് അതിലേക്ക് വന്നാല് ആസ് ശ്രീനിവാസൻ പ്രൊഫസർ ശ്രീനിവാസൻ സർ വാസ് മെൻഷനിങ്, ഇത് ഞാൻ ഒരു കാര്യം കൂടി പറയാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നു. യുവർ ടൈറ്റിൽ ഓഫ് ദിസ് പ്രോഗ്രാം Globetrotting, ടൈറ്റിൽ ഓഫ് ദിസ് പ്രോഗ്രാം Globetrotting, അതെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ലോകം മുഴുവൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ രാജ്യത്തെ പറ്റി അറിയുക, സഞ്ചരിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളത് ഒരു വെർച്വൽ രീതിയിൽ, മീൻസ് വോയിസിലൂടെ, സാറിന്റെ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസസിലൂടെ ഡിഫറെന്റ് പാർട്സ് ഡിഫറെന്റ് റീജിയൻസിൽ വർക്ക് ചെയ്ത് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഡിഫറെന്റ് ഓർഗനൈസേഷൻസിൽ വർക്ക് ചെയ്ത ആ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസിലൂടെ അവിടെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് ആൾക്കാരെ ഫേസ് ചെയ്തത്, ആൾക്കാരെ ഡീൽ ചെയ്തത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വേരിയസ് ഇൻസിഡൻസ് ഉണ്ടായപ്പം എന്തൊക്കെയായിരുന്നു റിയാക്ഷൻസ്, ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള നറേഷൻ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും ഞാൻ ഒരുപാട് വർഷമായിട്ട് പലതും കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ ഇന്ന് പറഞ്ഞതിലും ഒരുപാട് പുതിയ കാര്യങ്ങൾ സാറ് പറഞ്ഞു. അപ്പൊ എനിക്ക് ഉള്ള ഒരു സജഷൻ, ബിക്കോസ് ഇതൊരു ഇനാഗുറൽ ലെക്ചർ ആയതുകൊണ്ട് ഇനി നമ്മൾ മുന്നോട്ട് പോവുകയാണ് സാറിന്റെ ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാം. അപ്പൊ അതുകൊണ്ടൊരു സജഷൻ, ഒന്ന് മേ ബി ദാറ്റ് ഓൾറെഡി യു വുഡ് ഹാവ് തോട്ട് അബൌട്ട് ദാറ്റ്, എന്നാ ഒരു ഏരിയ, ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു കൺട്രി, അവിടുത്തെ കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഇൻക്ലൂഡിങ് നോട്ട് ഓൺലി ആ ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റിക് ഇത് മാത്രമല്ല, അവിടുത്തെ പൊളിറ്റീഷ്യൻസിനെയും പോളിസി മേക്കേഴ്സിനെയും എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഡീൽ ചെയ്യുന്നത്, എന്ത് ഡിഫറൻസ് ആണ് ആ കൺട്രി വരുത്തുമ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ സാറിപ്പോ പറഞ്ഞു ചില എക്സാമ്പിൾസ്, ചില പ്രൈം മിനിസ്റ്റേഴ്സിന്റെ കാര്യം, വാജ്പേയിയുടെ കാര്യവും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മൊറാർജി ദേശായിയുടെ കാര്യവും, അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കൺട്രിയിലുള്ള ആൾക്കാരെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ്സ് ആണ് എപ്പോഴും ഇത് ഡീൽ ചെയ്യാറുള്ളത്. അത് മാത്രമല്ല മറ്റ് ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ്സിനെ ഡീൽ ചെയ്യുന്ന മറ്റ് കൺട്രികൾ, കാരണം കൾച്ചറൽ ടോട്ടലി ഡിഫറെന്റ്, സറൗണ്ടിങ്സ്, എക്സ്പീരിയൻസസ്, പോളിറ്റി, ജോഗ്രഫി, എവറിത്തിങ് ഈസ് ഡിഫറെന്റ്. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെ വരുമ്പോൾ ഈ ഇന്റർനാഷണലി ഉള്ള ഡീലിങ്സ് എന്തൊക്കെയാണെന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ പരിപാടികളും ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തതുപോലെ തന്നെ 2-3 ഭാഗങ്ങളോ ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു രാജ്യത്തെ പറ്റിയോ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സാർ വർക്ക് ചെയ്തതും വർക്ക് ചെയ്യാത്തതും, കാരണം വർക്ക് ചെയ്തില്ലെങ്കിൽ പോലും ഒരു ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ ഒരുപാട് എക്സ്പീരിയൻസസ് മറ്റു പല ആൾക്കാരിൽ നിന്ന് കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവും, അത് എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടാവും, പല ഡിസിഷൻ മേക്കിങ്ങിലും പാർട്ടായിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. അപ്പൊ അതൊക്കെ സാർ കനോട്ട് ടെൽ അസ്. പക്ഷെ പറയാവുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങൾ പറയുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് അത് മനസ്സിലാക്കുമ്പോഴുണ്ടാകുന്ന ആ ഒരു ഫീലിംഗ്, സത്യം പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഞാനിപ്പോ അത്രയും കേട്ട് ഈ കഥകളുടെ രീതിയിലല്ല, ആ ഇമോഷണലി സാർ ആ ഇടയ്ക്കിടയ്ക്ക് സാറിന്റെ ആ റിലീഫ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ ഒരു ഇതൊക്കെ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാല് ശരിക്കും ഒരു ഞാൻ എല്ലാവിധ ആശംസകളും സാറ്. വളരെ വണ്ടർഫുൾ. താങ്ക് യു സോ മച്ച് ഫോർ ദിസ് ഇനിഷ്യേറ്റീവ്. താങ്ക് യു.
Thank you, Vaishakh. Before you take over, shall I request Murali Tumarugudi to say a word? He is the other UN expert that we have in this group. Murali, can you hear me? He has raised his hand.
Yes.
Okay.
കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കേൾക്കാം. സ്പീക്കർ. യെസ്.
ഓക്കെ. താങ്ക് യു TPS. ഞാൻ ആകസ്മികമായിട്ട് വന്ന് പെട്ടതാണ്. ആസ് ഓൾവേസ് വെരി വെരി ഇൻസ്പയറിങ്. അതിങ്ങനെ അനർഗളമായി ഇങ്ങനെ പോവുകയായിരുന്നല്ലോ. എനിക്ക് ഇനിയുള്ള ദിവസങ്ങളിൽ മുൻകൂട്ടി അനൗൺസ് ചെയ്യുകയാണെങ്കിൽ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും കൂടുതൽ കാര്യങ്ങൾ കേൾക്കാനായിട്ടുണ്ടാകും. ഇറ്റ്സ് ഓൾവേസ് എ പ്ലഷർ ടു ലിസൺ ടു യു. പക്ഷേ എനിക്കൊരു ചോദ്യം ചോദിക്കാനുള്ള ഒരു അവസരമായതുകൊണ്ട്, യുഎന്നെ പറ്റി പറയാനുള്ളൊരു സമയമോ പ്രിപ്പറേഷനോ ഇല്ലാത്തത് കൊണ്ട്, പക്ഷെ ഞാൻ ആദ്യമായിട്ട് പറയട്ടെ, ഞാനിങ്ങനെ TPS പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ സത്യത്തിൽ ആലോചിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നത് എന്താണെന്നറിയാമോ? അതായത് റിട്ടയർ ആയിട്ട് ഈ ഔദ്യോഗികമായിട്ടുള്ള കെട്ടുപാടുകളും പ്രോട്ടോക്കോളും ഇല്ലാതെ ഒരു ദിവസം എനിക്കും ഇങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ പറയാൻ പറ്റുമായിരിക്കും എന്നാണ് ഞാൻ ആദ്യമായിട്ട് ചിന്തിച്ചത്. വളരെ ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റിക് അല്ലാത്ത പല കാര്യങ്ങളും TPS പറഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ വിചാരിച്ചു എനിക്കും പറയാം ഏതെങ്കിലും ദിവസം എന്ന് വിചാരിച്ചു. അത് Exactly, you have to be liberated. Okay. You have to be liberated from this. And I'm sure that one day, inshallah, that will happen. Now, എനിക്ക് ചോദിക്കാനുള്ളത്, TPS ഇപ്പൊ കായംകുളം പോലൊരു ഗ്രാമത്തിൽ നിന്ന് സാധാരണമായൊരു ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് ആണ് ഞാൻ മനസ്സിലാക്കിയിടത്തോളം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഒരു ഗ്രാമത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഡൽഹിയിൽ നിന്ന് ലോകത്തേക്ക് പോകുമ്പോൾ നമ്മളുടെ പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവിൽ ഉണ്ടാവുന്ന ഒരു മാറ്റം ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, നമ്മുടെ പ്രെജുഡിസസിൽ ഉണ്ടാവുന്ന ഒരു മാറ്റം, അത് ഹൗ ഹാസ് ഇറ്റ് ചേഞ്ച്? ഈ വിശ്വബോധം നമ്മൾ പറയുമ്പോൾ ലോകത്തേക്ക് മാറുമ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ പ്രെജുഡിസസിൽ എന്ത് മാറ്റമാണ് ഈ 40 വർഷത്തെ ഫോറിൻ സർവീസ് TPS?
Very difficult to summarize, but I suppose in my stories it will eventually come how I myself has changed over the years. I mean, that may be a study by itself. But it can be only described as a cultural shock every 3 years. Because coming to Trivandrum was a cultural shock. World. And so from there, so anything, that was so dramatic, you can imagine. And, going to the zoo and the museum and all that as a student, wonderland, nothing else. And a culture shock as to how people behave here. So that every 3 years, a summary about all that is, if you are able to survive for 37 years in these circumstances and come back to Kerala, I think that is an accomplishment in itself, even if I have done nothing for the country or the world. Mr. K. Narayanan used to say, നമ്മുടെ മലയാളത്തിൽ ഒരു ചൊല്ലുണ്ടല്ലോ, താഴെ വന്ന് പറയുന്നതാണ്, മുകളിൽ കയറി ഇരുന്ന് കള്ള് ചത്താം, ഡാൻസ് ചെയ്യാം, മറ്റുള്ളവരെ കളിയാക്കാം, ചീത്ത വിളിക്കാം, എന്തൊക്കെ ചെയ്യാം, പക്ഷെ എനി മോമെന്റ് ഹി കൻ ഫോൾ ഡൗൺ ഡെഡ്, അല്ലേ? അപ്പൊ അതുകൊണ്ട് അയാൾ താഴെ വന്ന് കയ്യിലുള്ള സാധനം താഴെ വെച്ച് കഴിയുമ്പോഴേ നമ്മൾ അയാളെ ഒരു അംഗീകരിക്കുള്ളൂ. അപ്പൊ അതായിരുന്നു കയറുന്നാരാണ് പറയാൻ വരുന്നത്. നിങ്ങളൊരു പൊളിറ്റീഷ്യനായിട്ട് അക്സെപ്റ്റ് ചെയ്ത് ഞാൻ ഈ തെങ്ങിന്റെ മുകളിൽ നിന്നുള്ള വിദ്യകൾ കാണിച്ചത് കൊണ്ടാണ്. പക്ഷെ ഈ തറയിൽ വന്നപ്പോ ഐ എം എ ഡിഫറെന്റ് പേഴ്സൺ അദ്ദേഹം പറയാറുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അത് തന്നെയാണ് എനിക്കും തോന്നിയത് തിരിച്ചു വന്നപ്പോ. കാരണം സർവൈവൽ വാസ് വെരി സിഗ്നിഫിക്കന്റ്, ഇമ്പോർട്ടന്റ്, ബിക്കോസ് എനി ടൈം എനിത്തിങ് കുഡ് ഹാവ് ഹാപ്പൻ ടു യു. All these, anybody could have shot you, anybody could have, hijacked you. അത്രയൊന്നും വന്നില്ലെങ്കിൽ armed attack in Kenya, I didn't mention it. Armed attack in Kenya, I didn't mention it. Broken left arm and a broken right foot in that attack. That's another story. So I have been through everything. Expulsion, I've been through armed attacks. I've been through armed attacks. I've been, anyway, except for vigilance inquiry, everything else I have faced. And I have held vigilance inquiry against my own colleagues, who are tempted to, because I believe that there is no corruption foreign ministry or foreign affairs. I believe that there is no corruption foreign ministry or foreign affairs. But then I discovered, when I had to do these vigilance cases, I found there are ways to do it. It was a discovery for me. I would never have imagined that. One of my colleagues in Kenya who retired as an ambassador, he used to, he was a consular officer. Okay. And take the fees and everything, and will not tell the section anything, just stamp the visa and give it to them and go. No receipt for the money. It's small money. He was running a business just under my nose. Now he's a very distinguished ambassador because I was kind to him. I could have thrown him out. I should. Government, maybe a small amounts of money. But how can you do that? Another person, he sold his car, and he declared he sold it for $5,000. And $2,000 he kept aside, fearing that the government might do something, repay some profit or something like that. Because his boss was different from me. So his boss was very tough. And he told the government, you remove him tomorrow, otherwise I am leaving, he said. So I could have done with the same person, who retired as a very distinguished ambassador and now lectures to me about policy. So tell me why it is said that next to the armed forces, the largest number of casualties take place in the foreign service because of this culture shock and also the temptations. You think that you are liberated, you are in New York, who is going to know that I am visiting somebody or whatever. And so you feel that everything is safe, and then nothing is safe. So that liberal thing, and the society is liberal, in parties you can hug women, which will be shocking in India. So, so then you start in India. So then you start having a liberal attitude yourself, and you think, and then you come back to Delhi and you start hugging the Austrian ambassador. People will wonder what was happening in Vienna. So this is the so there are wonder what was happening in Vienna. So this is the so there are many changes. I will talk about them as we go along, because we need to give everybody a chance, at least some
Yes.
people a chance to ask. Thank you,
Thank you.
Murali, for coming first of all. And we have already
Yes.
announced a program every Saturday from 6 to 8.
Very good.
And
Thank
even
you.
the topic program every Saturday from 6 to 8.
Very good.
And
Thank
even
you.
the topics have been announced.
Okay. I have to see. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
TPS.
thank you.
Sir, have a quick question. There was a shock for me. സാറ് നമ്മളെല്ലാം വിചാരിച്ചിരുന്നത് ലോകം മുഴുവൻ ഈ കഥകളി എല്ലാവരും വളരെ ഇഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടിരുന്നുവെന്നും അതായത് ഈ ആളില് നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടെ പലപ്പോഴും കഥകളി നടക്കുമ്പോൾ ഫോറിനേഴ്സ് വന്ന് കാണുകയും അതിനെപ്പറ്റി ഒരു വലിയ രീതിയിൽ ഉള്ളൊരു ഒരു ആയിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ സാറിത് ഈ കഥകളി വന്നതിനെ പറ്റി ഇങ്ങനൊരു ഒരു ഷോക്ക്, സാറിന്റെ കൾച്ചർ ഷോക്ക് അത് നമുക്ക് കിട്ടിയത്, that was a very surprising anecdote that you said,
Yes.
because people generally have a feeling that all over the world Kathakali is seen as a something to be showcased and well received. And I am
You could have had a
I'm just saying.
Kalyana Saugandhikam demon going around in the forest or some such thing you could have done. But they decided to do something which is absolutely, spectacular. That was the mistake they made.
Correct. Even അതിന്റെ ഒരു അപ്രീസിയേഷൻ മലയാളിക്ക് തന്നെ വളരെ ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുള്ളൊരു ഒരു അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ഉള്ളൊരു കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞത് വളരെ വളരെ സർപ്രൈസിംഗ് ആയിട്ട് വളരെ ഒരു ഇതായിരുന്നു. അത് ജസ്റ്റ് ഒന്ന് കമന്റ് ചെയ്തേ
And
ഉള്ളൂ.
also you should know the North-South divide. Your Prime Minister and your Foreign Minister have not seen Kathakali in their life.
Correct. അതെ, true. Very surprising.
Okay, all right. Vaishakh, please give the floor to anyone who wants.
സർ, റാഷിഖ് കുറഞ്ഞ വാക്കുകൾ എന്തെങ്കിലും സാറിനോട് ചോദിക്കാനുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ചോദിക്കാം.
എന്റെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ഇതാണ്, കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കേൾക്കാം.
ഇന്ത്യൻ ഫോറിൻ പോളിസിയിലെ ഇന്ത്യത്തിൽ താഴെ മാത്രമാണ്. ഇത് ഇന്ത്യൻ ഡിപ്ലോമസിയെ എങ്ങനെയെങ്കിലും ബാധിക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ? അമേരിക്കയിലൊക്കെ 20,000 ഫോറിൻ ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റുകളുണ്ട്. ചൈനക്കാണെങ്കിൽ 4,000-ഓളം ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റുകളുണ്ട്. ഇന്ത്യയിലെ നമ്പർ കുറഞ്ഞ IFS ഓഫീസറുകളുടെ സേവനം എങ്ങനെയെങ്കിലും ഇന്ത്യയുടെ ഫോറിൻ ഡിപ്ലോമസിയെ ബാധിക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ?
തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും നമുക്ക് കൂടുതൽ ആളുകളുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് കൂടുതൽ ജോലി ചെയ്യാം, പക്ഷെ അത് കൂടുതൽ പണം ചെലവാക്കുകയും വേണം. അപ്പൊ അതിന്റെ ഒരു ബാലൻസ് വേണമല്ലോ. പിന്നെ വേറൊന്ന്, നമ്മൾ 600 ഫോറിൻ സർവീസ് ഓഫീസേഴ്സേ ഉള്ളെങ്കിലും നമ്മുടെ എംബസി ഇവരെ മാത്രം കൊണ്ടല്ല ഓടുന്നത്. There are many IAS officers, customs officers, economic ministry representatives. So many people are there. So 600 is not the number that we deal with. For example, in Moscow, there were about 150 people there. About 30 diplomatic officers. But there are only 3 or 4 IFS officers. The only mission where there are only IFS officers is our mission to the UN, New York and Geneva, because that's a very highly specialized job, and therefore nobody else comes. But virtually a government of India is being run in Moscow, in London. In London, can you imagine, there are 1,500 people at one time in that mission. Now it is 150, I think. So, therefore, there are many people involved, number one. Number two, Number two, the more people they will have, you do more things. But there is a choice to be made. Like I was ambassador to Vienna, which meant I was ambassador to Austria, I was ambassador to Slovenia, I was ambassador to the IAEA, I was ambassador to OPEC, I was ambassador to European Union. All this, I was one single Indian ambassador. And I had at least 7 or 8 opposite numbers in the American embassy. 6 or 7 in the Russian embassy. Even in the Iranian embassy, had 3 ambassadors in Vienna. Separate ambassador for that, another one for UN, another one for bilateral ambassador to deal with Austria. And we had no political problems with Austria. I hardly did anything for Austria. Maybe 10% of my work. But there are ambassadors, separate ambassadors for almost all the countries. One for Slovenia. I don't know what she does there. I used to make a trip once in a while. Wonderful place, Tito's Palace and everything else. But now we have a full-time ambassador. If you ask me, I had told them that there is no need. So at least till I left, I did not allow a mission to be opened in Slovenia. But they have found Slovenia may become very important commercially and all that. So there must be, government does not waste money like that. So there must be a logic. So you can have a large mission, large number of people, but you can also manage with a smaller number. Even in the UN, we have only 12 people in our mission. The UN, so we cannot compete with them. But in terms of number of missions, we are competing with everybody because the number of missions we have more than most other countries, except perhaps France. Even US has fewer embassies and consulates. So that we do. There is a problem there, but we have solved it. So that we do. There is a problem there, but we have solved it. And India's diplomacy is considered next only to the 5 permanent members. Many assessments have been made in terms of performance, in terms of influence. India ranks number 6 because permanent members are a breed in themselves in the UN. Because permanent members are a breed in themselves in the UN. They are unbeatable. But next to that, India and Pakistan considered the best multilateral diplomats. So we are not doing so badly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We are not doing so badly.
Okay, thank you, sir. Shamnath.
Hi, sir. Sorry, I just joined. I don't know, is there any restrictions to the topic to be discussed, or I can ask anything, sir?
Well, we are starting a new show in a sense. We are starting a new show in a sense. And
Okay.
so what I was doing an overview of what is to come. So,
Great.
and therefore, if you have not heard what I said, you may not be able to pinpoint your question. Anyway, you can try.
No, sir, my question was basically on Kashmir.
Oh, no.
I know.
That's not on the agenda today because then we'll have to stay here the whole night. Whole night. Kashmir cannot be disposed of in 2 minutes. We'll do that. We'll have
All
no
right.
problem to do that. Yeah, certainly.
Sure.
ഓക്കെ 8:00 ആയിട്ടുണ്ട്. നമുക്കിത് തുടർന്ന് പോകണോ അതോ ഒരു അനൗൺസ്മെന്റോട് കൂടി അടുത്ത ആഴ്ചയിലേക്ക് കിടക്കണോ?
I don't mind. Since there are so many people waiting, if they have questions, let us not stop that.
ഓക്കെ ഷുവർ സാർ. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ ഈ നമ്മളിന്ന് ഓപ്പൺ ആക്കിയിടാം റൈസ് ഹാൻഡ് ഓപ്ഷൻസ്. താല്പര്യമുള്ള കുറച്ച് പേരുടെയും കൂടെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് നമുക്ക് എന്റർടൈനിങ് വിത്ത് TPS എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ക്ലബ്ബ് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഏറ്റവും മുകളിൽ കാണാൻ കഴിയും. അപ്പോൾ അതെല്ലാവരും ഒന്ന് ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുവാണെങ്കിൽ ഈ കണ്ടിന്യൂസ് ആയിട്ട് ഇനിയും ചെയ്യുന്ന ഇത്തരം പ്രോഗ്രാമുകൾ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കൃത്യമായിട്ട് കാണാൻ കഴിയും. അതിനോടൊപ്പം നെക്സ്റ്റ് സാറ്റർഡേ എല്ലാ സാറ്റർഡേയ്സും ഈവനിങ് 6 o'clock ഈ പ്രോഗ്രാം ഷെഡ്യൂൾ ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത്. അപ്പോൾ താല്പര്യം ഉള്ളവർക്ക് അതിൻ്റെ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യാം. അതോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ അടുത്ത് മേക്കിംഗ് ഓഫ് എ ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ്. അപ്പോൾ അതിൻ്റെ റൈറ്റ് സൈഡിലായിട്ടൊരു ബെല്ലൈക്കൺ ഉണ്ടാവും. അതൊന്ന് ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്യുവാണെന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ കൃത്യമായിട്ട് ആ സമയത്ത് നോട്ടിഫൈ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. അപ്പോൾ അതും കൂടെ എല്ലാവരും ഒന്ന് ചെയ്യണമെന്ന് അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുകയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഇനി ബാക്കി നമുക്ക് മറ്റുള്ള ചോദ്യങ്ങളിലേക്ക് കിടക്കാം. മറ്റുള്ള സ്പീക്കേഴ്സ് വന്നിട്ട് അവരിലേക്ക് കിടക്കാം. സോ സുനു വാല.
അതെ, ഞാൻ ഒരു സംശയം ചോദിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി വിളിച്ചതാണ്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് നമ്മുടെ ഫോറിൻ ഡിപ്ലോമാറ്റ്സിന് വളരെ ഫ്രീക്വന്റ് ആയിട്ട് അവരുടെ കൺട്രി വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്ന കൺട്രി മാറ്റാറുണ്ട്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ UK വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരാള് കുറച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ US അവരുടെ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് അനുസരിച്ച്. അപ്പൊ അവരുടെ പ്രൊവിഷൻ കൊടുക്കും കുട്ടികളുടെ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കൾച്ചറൽ ഡിഫറൻസ്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ UK ഒരാള് ഫ്രാൻസിലേക്ക് മാറുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഫ്രാൻസിൽ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ അവരുടെ എങ്ങനെയാ ഒരു ഗവൺമെന്റ് എങ്ങനെയാ അത് ബാലൻസ് ചെയ്യുക ഇവരുടെ ഫാമിലി ലൈഫ്? അതിനുള്ള ഓപ്പർച്യൂണിറ്റി ഉണ്ട്.
Well, thank you. It's a very important question. New York to London or Paris. He'll go to Mozambique. He'll go to Angola. So the contrast is much more than what you imagine. Even mine, you missed my first part. from Tokyo to Bhutan was like traveling 50 years back in history. And from there to Moscow, a different world altogether. Different. So culture shock is very much there. But I must say, the Foreign Service is fairly protected, well protected. We have virtually everything free when we are abroad. No other bureaucracy has that. Housing is free, furniture is free, refrigerator is free. Even the cooking utensils are given there. So that you are everything. And medical is totally free. Housing you don't have to hunt. And, entertainment, you get enough and everything. But the culture shock, of course, the government cannot do anything about it because we have a system of alternating between tough posts and soft posts, tough to tough and soft to soft. It has happened. My going from, say, Washington to Vienna was dramatic. I should have actually gone to Africa. But then since I was retiring, they didn't want me to send off to Africa. So there are these, it is called a rotational principle. And children education is free. When I joined, it was not. And there were no English schools in many countries. Like in Japan, the English school was 14 kilometers away from the city. And small little children had to go on train journey. There is a school in Tokyo, English school, run by the American embassy, but the charges there were unaffordable. But now, in a dramatic change, the government of India decided about 30 years ago that any school in any capital, the best school, you can send your child free. In fact, the children's fee in Kenya for the American school, was bigger than my salary. Can you believe it? I could not have afforded it. But the government pays it. Of course, the whole thing stops when you finish your school. After that, the children don't get any benefit. But up to finishing the school, they go to the best schools in the world. In fact, these are all secrets of the service. When your children are young, if you are posted to New York, people refuse. People say, don't send me to New York now. Send me when my son is 17 years old so that I can I can keep him free in my house for his university education. Right? But the school in Kenya, the American school is as good as New York. So why should he go to New York and send him to a public school, the so-called public school system, United States? I can give him a special school in Kenya, and at the age of 17, you go there so you can get a whole free education for your son. So this kind of calculation is done by people. So for example, when I was posted, when my children were young, many people advised me, there are these wise people from some other country. I said, let me go to New York. They have posted me. Let me see. And then I went to New York 3 times after that. Nobody had predicted it. So anyway, this is all a mix. But there is compensation. And it is difficult but manageable.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Gopika, you can have your words.
Really.
Sir, first of all, thank you for this wonderful initiative. It is actually an example of how much of a democratization that this platform Clubhouse has brought with it, because to listen into conversations like this, that would have been otherwise been a privilege, capital cities for that matter. So thank you for this, first of all. I have 2 questions for you. So first is, how do you think the life of a diplomat has changed over the years? And do diplomats these days also get to play golf or other games with the Prime Minister? That's a bit of a non-serious one. Secondly, sir, as somebody who has extensively traveled around the world, how do you think the world's perception of India has changed or evolved over the years, especially in the post-independence era? Especially the people in the countries you have been to and lived in, what do they think about the Indian nation? That's perhaps a topic for another day, but if you could briefly tell us. That's
Okay.
it.
It's again a very broad question which will take hours. But I'll just make it very brief because others also are waiting. Changes in Changes in diplomacy. Diplomacy is a very conservative profession, let me tell you. Very little changes in form. Like, for example, we all become very casual. If you are working for Microsoft, you can wear a black t-shirt and a white trousers and go, right? You can wear a black t-shirt and a white trousers and go, right? You cannot do that in diplomacy. You have to wear your long suit, a tie, or a national dress if you go into the United Nations. Even today, it has not changed. Nobody is called by his name. Everybody is a distinguished representative of India. He is called by his name. Everybody is a distinguished representative of India or a distinguished representative of Algeria. Nobody. My name I lost in 1980 because nobody will call me by any name. They'll call you Mr. India or Delegate of India or the Distinguished Delegate of India. So these things don't change at all. And also playing with golf with high dignitaries also don't change. It all depends on the circumstances. I didn't mention I played with golf with Clinton, I can say, but not with Clinton, but with Clinton in front of me, and I was at the back because it was in Washington. It was the Army-Navy course when he plays, no? So when I went to the reception, I could see lots of vehicles and all that. So I said, "Is the president here?" He said, "Yes, he is playing. He's on the third hole. But up to second hole you can play. But don't play the third hole till he moves off." I said, "Fair enough." So I went, and then I found that it was the most dangerous situation because biggest challenge. You hit to the left, it goes straight to the right. And somewhere else. When you hit to the green, it goes to the nearest pond. So this is golf. So I just couldn't believe that when I was playing on the second hole, he was walking on the fourth, and he was about 200 yards from me. And some of the security guys came up and told me, "Why are you leaving? The president doesn't want to stop other people from it." I said, "But I don't want to be killed by his security guards." so these things are possible. These are basically smaller countries. You have access to prime ministers and presidents. But in the United States, you don't have access to the president unless your prime minister comes there. But that has also not changed. But without being conscious of it, we change all the time. Because every culture rubs on you. And you learn something which sometimes you imitate. And therefore you forget that this was not your way of dealing with somebody. We change. But with this pandemic has changed everything completely. Like every other profession, diplomacy has become completely different. The foreign minister of India made his first trip abroad in person. After 1 year, he would have seen the whole world by now. Quarantined because somebody got COVID-19. So this kind of situation I cannot imagine. I only hope these things will end sooner or later. Otherwise, everywhere else also is the same story. People are starving. What am I talking about? So that is changing a lot. And then the other thing I already referred to, if you are here, we had to write all these reports sitting in New York. After a Security Council meeting, I would sit there till 12 o'clock writing reports to send back home. But now there is no need. The Joint Secretary dealing with the UN in his office, he can listen to the debate in the Security Council. So I have to deal more with substance by telling them that the Israeli ambassador said this about Palestine. There's no news for him, but he would like to know why he said that or what is the change. So you have to be more analytical. So the profession has changed that way very drastically. And otherwise, in the morning, if you send out a cocktail party, your job is more or less over. Then you can start reading or go out for meetings, etc. That is now changed. You have to analyze, you have to give them the minimum material and help in the process of decision making. So that way, it has changed. It's inconvenient in one way, but it's beneficial now. So but there is a big change, and people fall by the wayside. Let me not forget that. People become victims of these changes. Its cultural shocks are too many. So you have to have a very strong character. Then you have to have a very strong stomach, because then you have to have a very strong stomach, because of eating all these, drinking all these, and then still be able to walk home. It's not easy. And people are tempted by this, Scotch whiskey is flowing, so why should I go home? That kind of thing. So the temptations are too many, and that kind of thing. So the temptations are too many, and that creates a lot of problems. So coming back after 37 years in one piece and walking and thinking, I think is an achievement. What was the second question?
Sir, it's about people's perception of India. Sir, it's about people's perception of India.
Oh, well, that I have a very fascinating story. Of course, it is an imaginary story. I always say that once I went to London, I was sitting in the airport. So a Britisher came and sat next to me. And so a Britisher came and sat next to me. And so he asked where I was going. I said, I'm going to New York, to the UN, etc. I'm sitting here to catch a flight and so on. So he said, you're Indian? I said, yes. Oh, very good. I've been looking for a palmist all these days. Can you please read my palm? Can you believe? They think that every Indian is a palmist. And I'm sure they will not steal my suitcase, my briefcase, because they think there's a snake inside it. Right? That was the image of India. I told you about the white tiger in the Expo 70 Indian Pavilion. We also know India is so great and nobody can catch up with that. They still are behind times in assessing India. That is why when something small happens, they start calling us half a democracy. Is it justified? When there was a rebellion in Washington, did we say now America is half a democracy? Democracy is not dead in America. Only Trump is gone. But do they trust us like that? One pandemic, they dismissed Narendra Modi as inconsequential. Because they still think that we are experimenting with democracy. They still think that this is too much of a thing for, that image is still there. But those who know India, those whom we deal with, they know India very well. They know the changes. They will tell you how experience has changed for them. So it's a mix. You can't take anything for granted. My favorite story is one day I said in a big meeting in Washington, Muslim country in the world. Everybody was so astonished. They thought that we are killing Muslims in India. Second largest Muslim country in the world. And not only next to Pakistan, next only to Indonesia. Oh, everybody after that told me, how come nobody told us this? Our perspective of India would have been different. I said, if you sit and talk to me for 2 hours, your perspective will be further different. So this is the problem in representing your country. You have to deal with delicate situations in your country. You have to deal with delicate situation arising from ignorance of India. And you don't get much time to explain everything to everybody. Another sensitive Kashmir question arose also. One day a very friendly Arab diplomat seen a big country, I don't want to mention the country, came to the delegates lounge and he offered me a drink. He doesn't himself drink, but then very nice, cocktails in the the UN delegates, cocktails in the UN delegates lounge. So he offered me a pina colada or whatever. And then he went to the fundamentals. He said, Mr. Ambassador, why are you so stuck about Kashmir? See, it's a small little place in India. You are such a huge country. You are such a huge country. And why are you making such a fuss? Give it to Pakistan. They will not take it away. It will be there. And the whole world will be peaceful. Okay? So I said, agreed. We hand over Kashmir to Pakistan today. But what will you do with 150 Muslims in India? A million Muslims. 150 million Muslims in India. What will happen to them? I said, Kashmir is the symbol of India's secularism. Otherwise, there would have been no Kashmir. So I said to the ambassador, it's a very big Arab country. I said, Mr. Ambassador, will you take care of 150 million Muslims? He said, no. So that is the kind of situations you have to face. They don't understand what it means. I hope I've convinced you. Go pick up.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you, Gopika, for your questions. Now we can move to Anand.
Opportunity. And my question is, where do you see India's foreign policy in the next 20 years? From being a non-aligned in the 1950s, according to the a diplomat's point of view.
Well, I would have given a clear prediction if the pandemic had not come. I cannot say what India's foreign policy will be. Because the changes that have taken place in India's foreign policy after the pandemic is dramatic. Dramatic. See, we had learned to live with China for many years. We sacrificed a lot. We could deal with China. The Prime Minister of India met Xi Jinping 15 times in his first 5 years. So we had managed a highly explosive situation. But today, it is in shambles. We don't know what is China. They don't know what. So I cannot say where we will be. What have we done? We have gone closer to the Americans because of the threat. We are a member of the Quad, which everybody thinks is a military alliance. We don't accept that. We are not there. The Russians are angry with us because we have gone to the Americans. So it's a total shambles. So the only thing I can say is that India will continue to be independent. The non-aligned spirit is there in all of us. We don't call it non-aligned, we call it strategic autonomy. We'll continue with that, and India will be prosperous. Even in the pandemic here, we have not done. Depending on the economy, our strength will grow, and we will become, what we have in mind is a multipolar world. We don't want a Cold War. What we want is a multipolar world, about 6 countries having their own centers of power and the others around them, and peace with all. But now we cannot say.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you, Anand. Now it's Kiran Suresh turn. You can ask questions.
Hi, sir. Good
Yes,
evening. Hi, sir. Good
yes.
evening. Yeah. Actually, I would like to know your views on India's foreign policy with Afghanistan, especially with Taliban. Yeah. When I did my brief analysis, I can see that over the years, India has, India has underwent a transition in its approach towards Taliban. It's more of a kind of taking a favorable stand. It's more of a kind of taking a favorable stand, actually. So how can you rate the transition from being critical to Taliban always, and in the current political scenario, current political how can you explain this transition from when it comes to Taliban and India's foreign policy? Yeah,
Well,
that's
you're
it.
making a mistake. You're confusing India's policy towards Afghanistan and against Taliban. Do you know that till today we have not spoken to Taliban face to face, publicly? Maybe there have been secret meetings, I don't know. Because history is repeating itself. When the Russians were thrown out, now the Americans are being thrown out of Afghanistan. What happened? And leaders of tribes, they all came in. And Taliban, what does Taliban means? It means students. So the so-called students took over and they destroyed everything. And the fact that we survived there was itself a surprise. They stopped girls from going to school. No singing being allowed. So they continued for 2 years like that. And we had nothing to do with Afghanistan. We had a mission, but we were working closely with the UN, and the UN representative himself was in danger. We lost 2 officers, 1 diplomat and a military. We don't want to return to that. And that is what Americans don't mind. They want to go saying terrorism has ended. They know very well that terrorism has not ended. Therefore, they are quite willing to hand over to Taliban and leave. And that is why the Americans want us to be involved in the negotiations. We are not involved in claims that India has no border with Afghanistan. It is a border with POK. So they go around saying that we have the system, how we have managed to carry on. And our view even today is that the Americans should stay. At least some of them should stay, because we don't want the chaos. Everybody wanted Soviet Union to leave, but when they left, they were so chaotic, nobody could handle it. A similar situation will come. So what we are hoping is that the present administration and Taliban will have come some kind of an agreement, and a composite government will come through. And the Americans are not so keen about it. They just want to leave, and they will hand it to Taliban even now. They used to deal with Taliban even before the 9/11. They used to deal with Taliban even before the 9/11, before Taliban was thrown out of Afghanistan. So our position has not changed. We have not compromised with Taliban, but a time may come that we may have to accept them. But then I don't know how long it will last. Because Taliban are very militaristic people, and what will they do with this government after some time? So it is not that we have changed our position, but we are hoping that a composite government will come. If it is not a composite government, and we won't have anything to do with Taliban, then you have to write off Afghanistan, and in the process, Pakistan will dominate and send more terrorists to our country. God help us.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you, Kiran. CP Nair ku samsariya.
Good evening, Ambassador. How are you?
Thank you.
It is nice to connect with you once again. Well, I have a a wild question for you. You know how things are happening. All of us know in that fact that how China has being together, and actually they are growing, and pandemic and various other things. Do you ever fancy a situation like what happened in
എപ്പിസോഡിന്റെ കാര്യം
USSR?
ഒന്നുകൂടെ ഒന്ന് ഇടയ്ക്കൊന്ന് പറയുക. പിന്നെന്താണ് സാറിനെ ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുക. ഈ ഫർദറായിട്ട് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ചോദിക്കാൻ അവസരം കിട്ടാത്തവർക്ക് അടുത്ത ആഴ്ച വരിക ഡെഫിനറ്റ് ആയിട്ട്. പർട്ടിക്കുലർ Srinivasan@gmail.com ഈ ഇമെയിലിലോ സാറിൻ്റെ ഫേസ്ബുക്കിലോ സാറിൻ്റെ ഫോൺ നമ്പറൊക്കെ നെറ്റിൽ അവൈലബിൾ ആണ്. TPSreenivasn.com എന്നുള്ള വെബ്സൈറ്റ് ഉണ്ട്. ഏത് വഴിയും സാറിനെ കോൺടാക്ട് ചെയ്യാം. സാർ ഹാപ്പി ടു നിങ്ങളുടെ ഏത് സംശയവും ഇത് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് എന്നൊക്കെ ഒന്ന് പറയാം.
Okay, is this going to be the last question or what?
Yeah, thanks, Vaishakh. I'll get back to my question, Ambassador. So I have a wild question. We know that all of us know that China is actually a strong power under Xi Jinping. Would you ever imagine, or can we imagine a situation like what happened in the USSR, like China splitting into 3 or 4 countries in another maybe 5 years or 10 years or something like that happen?
Kind question that you are asking. Soviet Union collapsed. How many people predicted it?
I understand. But again,
on Kremlinology, wondering which leader will come, who is standing next to Brezhnev and who is sitting. And, people were drawing pictures to find out what will happen in the Soviet Union. And when Gorbachev fell, nobody anticipated it. Billions of dollars spent on researching, watching Soviet Union did not lead them anywhere. But we have a wishful thinking. I should not be saying this publicly. But we hope that something will happen to China which will change the situation. What are the possibilities? One possibility is that in an oppressive political system, an open economic system will not work. This is our presumption. And we are seeing signs of it all the time. They have managed it, but we don't know how long they will. So either they'll have to give up their capitalism or they'll have to give up their communism. If that happens, there will be a violent change in China. The second possibility is an environmental collapse because they are very careless about the environment. I was in Beijing 4 years ago on a summer environment. I was in Beijing 4 years ago on a summer day in Beijing. You couldn't open your eyes. So much of smoke and these huge cities. Beijing is not the only city. So one day it might happen that it will become unlivable. One day it might happen that it will become unlivable. And then a system change or a leadership will come. Other than these two, I can't think of anything that would change the system because it is so much personalized. So the system was so much personalized. So the system was every 10 years, the ruler used to change. And Xi Jinping has done a big disservice to that system by making himself permanent. So now that he is completing his original term, there will be pressures. Now that he is completing his original term, there will be pressures on him to leave. But he is so much in control that he is not going to do that. So there could be a problem there. So these are all wishful thinking on our side because in China as it exists today and the way it is, because in China as it exists today and the way it is growing, there is no way we can compete with them. The asymmetry is so huge that we can say all these brave things about, oh my God, we can destroy China and we have this and we have this. These planes from France and Mirages before that, and now this. Nothing. It is not even 1/10 of what they have. Even the economy. How large is they're talking about $15 billion economy. We are still talking about $5 billion. So there is no point them submissive to us or let them collapse. That's not possible. So our philosophy was to coexist with China. And that is why we did all these sacrifices we made, all these adjustments we made. But now we are collapsed and we don't know where to start. So we cannot fund. Because there is a difference between Soviet Union and here, because they were all nationalities, each of those states. You know that. Uzbek had nothing to do with Tajiks, and Tajiks had nothing to do with the Russians. So they were all republics and they were independent countries before, and now they are again independent countries. But China was, and Tibet is the only addition. And Tibet, they have already made it into a Han Chinese settlement. So we have to live with China with all its. One most unbelievable thing was they started off during the pandemic. So there is unless they started the pandemic themselves. But still they are ruling the world. They're offering us vaccines and relief materials. So difficult to say. But we can discuss this for a whole day. All right?
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much for your time and your comments.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And sorry, CP, I have interrupted in your questions.
Not a problem. Not a problem, Vaishakh. Are
No.
we closing?
You were just closing it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sir, can I ask a question, please?
Yes. Ladesh Bhatia, it's your turn. You can ask.
Please.
Yes. Ladesh Bhatia, it's your turn. You can ask.
Thank you, moderators, and good evening, Mr. Ambassador. I had one question in mind since long. How soon can India become the permanent member of United Nations?
I would say never.
United Nations.
I would say never. Why are you asking me why?
Why, sir?
Yeah, why?
Do you know what you require to be a permanent member of the Security Council? You need 2/3 majority of the Security Council. You need 2/3 majority of the General Assembly. You make a quick calculation, 193. How many do they make? 2/3 means at least about 140, 145 members have to support. We don't have that support by any stretch of support. We don't have that support by any stretch of imagination. Because most member countries of the UN, which are small countries, will not benefit by an expansion of the council. They will never be able to get into the council. So their idea is to block others from going there. And it is that the veto should be abolished and these 5 should be thrown out and made to face elections every 2 years. That is what the world wants. So into that situation, we are injecting 5 countries. Japan, Germany, India not agree among themselves. And these 5 people will vote for ourselves. But nobody else will vote. They will not say that to you now. There are many who have pledged their support. They say, oh, India is a great country. Who can stop you? Blah, blah, blah. But nobody has told us, when the vote comes, I'll vote for you. Very specific cases where, we were told at one time that every ambassador was told, we will judge your performance on the basis of the decision that your country will make about India's permanent membership of the Security Council. Then you know what I wrote back? Austria will never vote for us. Never accept an expansion of the permanent membership. So why are you wasting your time? You're testing me and asking me to perform. Here is my resignation. And most countries are like that. So, it should be democratized. At the same time, we say, please take 5 of us. Isn't it contradictory? So, we are trying to perpetuate the system by joining them. Others will not allow you to join them. And those 5 are not wanting to welcome you. Will be made. President Trump will say this, and President Obama came to India and is supposed to have declared his support. Nothing doing. He said that, I would like to see India once a permanent member of the Security Council. You know what he said? What he did soon after? He went back to Washington, secret message to their permanent mission in New York, saying, though the president has said this, you should not encourage India to become a candidate or start canvassing. You may think I am lying. No, this telegram has leaked. Hillary Clinton wrote that letter. So if you still want to be optimistic, please be. And our government is still optimistic. This time Prime Minister Modi got a bit impatient. He said, how long do you want us to wait to be a permanent member? How can you stop us? Blah, blah, blah. Rest of the world to come, time to come. So the only way we can be a permanent member is the UN is completely changed. Because the voting system requiring 2/3 majority of the General Assembly and 5 permanent votes, it will never happen. Nobody thought the British would leave India. So such things can happen. Otherwise, we have no chance to become a permanent member of the Security Council with veto. Maybe some compromise would be made. Okay, you become permanent member, but no veto, something like that. Some compromise may be worked out. But I can tell you, permanent membership with veto be worked out. But I can tell you, permanent membership with veto, never.
Nitesh, is it clear?
Yes, sir, it is clear. But okay, yeah, agreed.
He doesn't want to accept it.
Okay, yeah, agreed.
He doesn't want to accept it.
Yeah. In fact, sir, I'm still optimistic.
You're a proud Indian. You're a proud Indian. I am no less. But you have to be ready. You asked me a question, I gave you an answer. So don't
Yes, sir,
judge
it
me.
was.
Don't judge
No,
my
sir, I know.
patriotism on the basis of that.
No, sir, never.
Don't judge
No,
my
sir, I know.
patriotism on the basis of that.
No, sir, never. In
Okay.
fact, I'm a great fan of you.
All right. My dinner bell is ringing continuously. So let us come to a conclusion.
ഓക്കെ സോ നമുക്കിനി വളരെ പെട്ടെന്ന് ജിഷാദിലേക്ക് കൂടെ പോവാം. ജിഷാദ് വളരെ പെട്ടെന്ന് ചോദ്യം ഒന്ന് പ്ലേസ് ചെയ്താൽ നന്നായിരിക്കും. വളരെ പെട്ടെന്ന് ചോദ്യം ഒന്ന് പ്ലേസ് ചെയ്താൽ നന്നായിരിക്കും.
2 ചോദ്യങ്ങളെ ഉള്ളൂ എന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു അല്ലേ?
അതെ, ജിഷാദ് ആൻഡ് ശരത്. ജിഷാദ്, യു ക്യാൻ പ്ലേസ് യുവർ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ. ജിഷാദ് കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ? ജിഷാദ്?
His mic is still mute.
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening.
Mute.
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good
Good evening, sir. Good evening, one and all. So Afghanistan is about to deport the 4 women they have joined in IS. So India, as per the news, India is not accepting their return.
Yes.
This is the right of Afghanistan to deport these kinds of people. India is against accepting them. So what would be their state? Will there be a stateless contest? Will they be in a no man's land? Or what is the international rule saying related with? Yes.
Where this issue was extensively discussed. Ambassador Fabian arguing very strongly that they should be accepted. And somebody else arguing very strongly that we need not accept them. But we will have to accept them one day or the other. We can delay it as long as we want. And we can hope that something will happen to them in the prisons. If they have a established Indian nationality, whatever their crime, we cannot refuse to accept them. We can accept them, arrest them at the airport, take them to the court, try them and hang them. But to say some crime he committed somewhere else, that will be a very difficult thing. Legally, I don't know. But politically, it is not possible. That will give a very wrong answer to our people abroad. Because many people get into trouble abroad. And if India takes a position because what they did was wrong and therefore we will disown them, that I think will be very difficult for any Prime Minister to take. But so he will delay it. Some other countries have also not accepted. And maybe we'll finally have a deal with Afghanistan. Let these ladies live in Afghanistan, peace and quietly. Have a deal with Afghanistan. Let these ladies live in Afghanistan, peace and quietly. So there are so many ways of solving it. But the position that we will not touch them is not tenable.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jishad. So now the last question, we can move to Sharath.
Sir, I have a small question. Our former MEA spokesperson, Mr. Ravish Kumar, small question. Our former MEA spokesperson, Mr. Ravish Kumar, is currently the ambassador for Finland and Estonia.
Yeah.
Recently, he shared a photo in Twitter that he's inspecting a guard of honor in Finland in the presence of the Finland president during his handing over of credentials, all those things. And president during his handing over of credentials, all those things. So is it a regular practice in all countries, or India is a big country and Finland has got a good relation and small country? So that's why they are offering such a ceremony.
No, it's not a separate. See, in protocol, you cannot discriminate. See, in our country, whether President of United States comes or the President of Vanuatu, which has 150,000 people. I brought Vanuatu President to India. That's why I'm giving that example. The protocol is the same. No change. Same cars, same accommodation in the Rashtrapati Bhavan, same posters. On the America comes, everybody will be on the street. But protocol is the same. This Vanuatu President, poor man, he was visiting Kerala. And he can visit Kerala only on a special plane, a charter plane. He cannot travel in a commerce plane. So he was telling me, I'm not telling a lie. He said, Ambassador, is there some way in which I need that money that you're going to spend on my special flight? I said, sorry, Your Excellency, we cannot do that. You are the President of Vanuatu and you will go by special plane. No, his 5-year plan would have been funded with that money. Imagine a country with 150,000 people. So protocol is all the same. And I myself had a guard of honor in Austria in the presence of the president. I have had a guard of honor in Fiji, in Kenya, everywhere. But the ceremonies change. India makes a big fuss. We put the ambassador in a horse-drawn carriage. Now I believe it has been stopped. Take him all that, and Rashtrapati Bhavan, as you know, so much space, and it's all being cut down. Every year so if we cut down for one person, we cut down for everybody. So if Mr. Ravish Kumar thinks that it was a very special favor to him, it can't be. It is not possible.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. So, ഇന്നത്തെ ഈ ഒരു ടോക്കിൻ്റെ ഒരു കൺക്ലൂഷൻ പോർഷനിലേക്ക് വരുവാണ്. അപ്പോൾ നേരത്തെ സൂചിപ്പിച്ചതുപോലെ തന്നെ എല്ലാവരും ഈ ഒരു ക്ലബ്ബ് ഒന്ന് ഫോളോ ചെയ്യുക, ഗ്ലോബ് ട്രോട്ടിംഗ് വിത്ത് TPS. അതിൽ നെക്സ്റ്റ് സാറ്റർഡേയിലെ പ്രോഗ്രാം ഓൾറെഡി അനൗൺസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതൊന്ന് ബെല്ലൈക്കണേ. എന്തെങ്കിലും ടോപ്പിക്സ് സാറ് ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്യാനോ ചോദ്യങ്ങളോ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ TP Sreenivasn gmail.com എന്ന് പറയുന്ന അതിലേക്ക് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് മെയിൽ അയക്കാവുന്നതാണ്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സാറിൻ്റെ വെബ്സൈറ്റ് ഉണ്ട്, വെബ്സൈറ്റിൽ അതിൽ സംശയങ്ങൾ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഉന്നയിക്കാം. ഇത്തരം ഡിസ്കഷൻസ് സാർ അതിനുള്ള മറുപടി പറയുന്നതായിരിക്കും. സോ ഇന്നിപ്പോൾ ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ ചോദിക്കാനായിട്ട് അവസരം ലഭിക്കാത്തവർക്ക് അവസരം ലഭിക്കുന്നുണ്ടായിരിക്കും. സോ ഇന്നിപ്പോൾ നിങ്ങൾ കേട്ടത് ശരിക്കും ഇറ്റ്സ് ഓൺലി ആൻ ഓവർവ്യൂ, വളരെ വലിയൊരു സിനിമയുടെ ഒരു ട്രെയിലർ എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന പോലെയുള്ള വളരെ ഒരു നെറ്റ്ഷെല്ലുള്ളൊരു കാര്യം മാത്രമേ നമ്മൾ കേട്ടിട്ടുള്ളൂ. ഒരു ബുക്കിൻ്റെ കൺസെപ്റ്റ് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഇറ്റ്സ് ഓൺലി ആൻ അബ്സ്ട്രാക്ട്. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു കണ്ടന്റ് മാത്രം ഇങ്ങനെ പോയിക്കുവാണ്. വരുന്ന എപ്പിസോഡ്സിൽ ഓരോന്നിനെ കുറിച്ചും സാറ് വളരെ ഡീറ്റെയിൽഡ് ആയിട്ടുണ്ടായിരിക്കും. സോ അപ്പോൾ എല്ലാവരും ഈ ഒരു ദിവസം എല്ലാ ആഴ്ചയിലും സാറ്റർഡേയ്സ് ഫ്രം 6 to 8, മേ ബി 8:30, അതെല്ലാവരും ഒന്ന് നിങ്ങളുടെ കലണ്ടറിലൊന്ന് മാർക്ക് ചെയ്യുക. വളരെ ഇൻഫോർമേറ്റീവായ ഒരു സെഷൻ മിസ്സാവാതിരിക്കാനായിട്ട് ശ്രമിക്കുക. സോ എനിവേ എല്ലാവർക്കും താങ്ക് യു. വൈൻഡപ്പ് ചെയ്യാമല്ലോ സാർ?
Very good. Thank you very much for everybody.